It's one of my favorites.
Welcome to Jude, the podcast. I'm David Jude. I'm your host as always. And again, thank you for every like, share, listen, and download. I really appreciate the support that you give the show. Hey, another exciting episode for us here. This has been, it's been a long time coming to have our guest with us. We have Miss Jennifer Davis here from CBD Wellness of Kentucky. Jennifer, thanks for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
Heck yeah. Now, we've been talking about doing this show for
Couple of years.
Maybe a couple of years now.
2 years, yeah.
Something like that. Mm-hmm. And it's taken us a little bit to get there. But so for me, it's a pretty exciting night to have you here and to talk about this finally. I think it's a big topic. And I also believe that things happen for a reason. So for us to take a little time to get here, it's probably to make this a better show.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm excited.
So tonight we're here to talk about I'm not sure what to lump it in, so I'm just going to call it cannabis education.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think there's a lot for us to unwind. There's a lot that's happened both in Kentucky and I think nationally, and I think there's just a lot of questions and talk about it. So anyway, that'll be for tonight. And let me just start with that. So you have a history of being a cannabis educator or consultant. How would you phrase that?
Yes. So it's one of my favorite subjects. So I appreciate you bringing me here.
Well, of course.
Tonight. And I'm very passionate about it. So I'm going to kind of condense it down. I've been involved actively in cannabis advocacy since 1998. But what that looked like in 1998 is a lot different than now, obviously. So, as a young person, I loved the plant. I preferred it over the other choices that my peers were using, which was usually alcohol or different kinds of illicit pharmaceuticals back 1998. And I preferred the plant medicine. And, how it was just a mild recreational, choice as opposed to like seeing my friends drinking and what that involved and the trouble that they got into for that. And so once I got into college during that time period, there was a lot of push for like marijuana legalization and to the end of prohibition, which was a long shot off for Kentucky back then, but things were happening out west during that time period. So I was involved in advocating openly during college and then afterwards, and I worked on Gatewood Galbraith's campaign in 2005.
Yeah.
I was in charge of his voter registration committee when he ran that year for governor. And anyone who knows anything about Gatewood knows that he was always very outspoken about marijuana legalization. And then in 2017, things kind of changed. So I got diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. And at the same time period, I was also invited by a local hemp company to come and tour their facilities and their farms because I had a yoga studio in Lexington and they were looking for some new accounts. And so it felt very serendipitous at the time because I was trying to deal with all this pain that I had and this new diagnosis that I didn't really understand how extreme the diagnosis was at the time, and like what was going to be my path forward. And, with rheumatoid arthritis, the path forward is very dangerous pharmaceuticals. It's that or nothing. It's literally that or nothing.
I mean, you're getting into pain pills and.
I mean, it's literally, they have nothing to offer you, but very, very strong pharmaceuticals that they have to check your liver for every, month or two. And you can't go out in the sun and you can't drink alcohol and the methotrexates. And as I started to kind of share with some people in the community that I'd received this diagnosis and I was being offered the methotrexates, I had countless people tell me, I have RA too, or my mom has RA. And they went on these methotrexates and they were sick immediately, and some of them immediately hospitalized. And so I chose to not do that. And I still, as of today, do not do that. But if you go and see a doctor for rheumatoid arthritis, they'll pretty much tell you that if you're not going to do the methotrexate, you might as well not come anymore. So I chose alternative paths, which were continuing to do yoga, hot tub therapy, and then integrating CBD into my daily like vitamin regimen. And so when this company invited me to come and tour their facilities and learn about their company, it was just like perfect timing. And I fell in love with the company. They taught me a lot about CBD and hemp-based products and what the law looked like and what the market looked like. And this was very early on in the program. And I developed just a great relationship with them. And I was really lucky because the company that invited me, I still now, all these years later, believe that they are the best CBD company in the United States, because they value quality and transparency so much. And their whole mission is for wellness, not for money. It's not to make a dollar. It's because the owner, which now they're on the stock market, but before that, you know, the original owner, he really wanted people to be able to access the medicine.
Yeah, that's refreshing, isn't it? It
is very refreshing. And I loved, he was from Australia, but I loved that he chose to come and partner with Kentucky farmers. And he was basically putting tobacco farmers who no longer were going to farm tobacco because of legislation changes at the federal level. He just helped transition them right over to hemp. And they're one of the few hemp companies that have come into Kentucky that haven't just screwed their farmers. Because if you know anything about the hemp business in Kentucky, you'll know that most of those CBD companies and those big out of you know, foreign entities have come in and literally destroyed some farmers here in Kentucky. But that company has not. They've always worked really well with the Kentucky farmers and ensured success for them. And so at that time, I started offering CBD products through my yoga studio, and I had a lot of people coming in asking about it. And I realized very quickly that the questions and the information that people wanted was not really about CBD. They wanted cannabis in general. Most of those people were of the age 60 plus, and most of them had come to me through word of mouth. And many of them were like people that I grew up with or went to school with parents. And so when they came to me, they kind of already knew me. They knew my family and they trusted me. And that's not something that I took lightly. So it was really important to me to make sure that these people from my community, who I know their children, I know their grandchildren,
right,
that I was giving them 100% the right information, the best information, you know, and holding that level of integrity.
Did you find that interesting that it was an older crowd coming to you? I'm trying to think through that, and I guess that kind of makes sense in a way.
Yes, it did. Yes and no. So it makes sense in the aspect of that 60 plus. So, you know, the body is aging. We start to have all of these aches and pains and all these different problems. The thing is that a lot of that age group grew up with old cannabis hysteria. So a lot of that age group, you know, like my parents included, grew up in a time period where they were told that it was just terrible, that it was terrible for you. It's bad. You shouldn't do it. It'll make you lazy. It'll make you stupid. Only people who don't work and are lazy use cannabis. So I think that for a lot of them, they want to come to someone like me that they trust and they respect, because in some ways they want me to teach them or convince them that those things are not true.
Certainly.
The other thing too is that when we look at that age group of 60 plus, we have to bear in mind that at least here in Kentucky, at least central Kentucky, we can speak for this. And you being an ex-police officer will know for sure about this.
Right.
That generation is the generation that has experienced having to raise their grandchildren, not by their choice, but because the opioid epidemic has been so damaging to our state and to central, well, not just central, but eastern Kentucky as well, but just in general to our state.
Sure.
The opioid epidemic has come in and like ravaged our state. And so when you deal with the demographic of 60 plus, you're dealing with a group of people that either A, have had to help raise their grandchildren because their children are addicted to opioids, or B, they have friends like that and they are aware of that. So not to mention the fact that if you live in cities like Lexington, you can drive around and see it it doesn't matter which day of the week, you see it with your own eyes.
Yeah.
So I think that there is a really big fear of that 60 plus age range of, I don't want to do that. And unfortunately, if you go to the doctor and you're 60, 65 years old and you're like, oh, my back hurts every single day, my neck hurts, my knee hurts, this, that, and the other. The things that they will offer you are very limited. And most of that is going to be opioid-based products, muscle relaxers, these kinds of things. Every now and then you will find a doctor who actually promotes healthy eating, exercise, and physical therapy, but that's a discussion for another day.
Right. It's a whole other show.
9 times out of 10, they're going to have no problem writing someone 65, 70 years old. Oh, here you go. No problem. Here is an opioid. Here is a muscle relaxer. Here is a pharmaceutical. But that age range is very clear on the fact that these things are addictive. They have seen what they have done to their children. They've seen the impact that has had on their grandchildren, and they are not interested. So what's happening is that they're sort of shifting this old school view of like, cannabis is terrible, marijuana is the devil's lettuce, to actually, I would rather do that than to take what the doctor is offering. Because at least I can function this way. I'm not going to be addicted. I can still have a normal life. And so I think that's why getting that crowd was sort of surprising, but not at the same time. And then for me personally, like I've always been like an old soul. So I was really close to all my grandparents. I've taught yoga since 2015, mostly to people 60 plus. Like that's just sort of that's sort of my people. So, but yeah, so I started offering, obviously one-on-ones. People would come in and I would spend a lot of time with individuals, and I started realizing I needed to try to group them together so I didn't have to spend 2 hours with Joe Smith when he walks into my shop today. Because I wasn't getting paid a single dollar for that. Right. And even if Joe bought a bottle of CBD off me, because I've always been so generous, especially with that demographic, I might only make $15 off that. So my husband and I used to have a joke that I used to make tens and tens and tens of pennies. But I felt very passionately about it.
Right.
And I was grateful to be in a position that people respected me to be able to give this information to them. So we started holding classes at my yoga studio and doing regular cannabis classes. And I would gear those toward different subject matters, kind of depending on like what people were coming in and talking to me about.
Sure. So you've really moved from and these are my words, right, from an educator role really to this consultant role.
Yes. And that, I think, like we were talking about before the show, I guess I was kind of always a consultant, but I didn't really view it that way because I was holding mostly classes and doing that kind of thing for people. And like I said, discussing the CBD products. But now, for the past little over a year now, I've definitely moved more into the consultant role because now I have a lot of people coming to me with very specific questions and very specific needs and really needing help to understand what does cannabis look like as medicine now that we are allowed to have THC in Kentucky.
Yeah.
So
consultant may be the dirtier word than marijuana or cannabis.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's probably a more negative connotation with the word consultant.
It makes me feel a little weird. There's kind of this weird thing of going from like advocacy to educator to consultant, but it's fine.
Well, and by the way,
still love it.
My company's a consulting company, so
so you know.
Yeah, I'm saying that from a place that I recognize.
Yes. Yeah.
You had spoke briefly about I don't remember exactly how you termed it, but the I don't want to say paranoia, that's the wrong word, but the chaos, I guess, that was brought on early on about marijuana and cannabis. And I had made a note here to ask you about this old movie called Reefer Madness, which I think was, from my very brief research, was like a 1930s movie.
Have you ever seen it?
No, I haven't. I was challenged today to see it. So.
I wouldn't waste your time. But,
so did that lead to this this broader issue of marijuana or cannabis being federally scheduled one, no medical use to it? Is Can you talk more about what that looked like?
Yes. So the movie definitely had an impact, but it was not the movie alone. So there was a lot of different factors that play into why cannabis became prohibited initially in America. So cannabis originally was not prohibited. It did not become prohibited until the early 1900s. So around that time period, leading up to that time period, it was considered medicine. So one of the things that I wanted to point out to you is that it was not removed from the U.S. pharmacopoeia until around 1950. So prior to 1950, it was actually within the pharmaceutical handbook that there was applications for it as medicine. The other thing I always like to mention to people, because I get a lot of questions about, well, this person said there's no research. That's absolute bullshit. We all have these beautiful little computers in our hands nowadays. Right. Please use them. AI will help you. So the Chinese have been using cannabis for over 4,000 years to treat mostly arthritis and pain. So when you look at things like that, you realize that, like, okay, we can be told that there's no research, but I need you to be more specific. Like, who is not researching it?
Right.
Because I would argue that when you have anything, especially when it's natural and it comes from the ground, and it's used for thousands of years by cultures of people, there's your research. That's really all you
But
need.
ironically, 1950.
People wouldn't keep using it if it didn't work.
Right.
Yeah. So prior to 1950, it was already illegal by 1950, but it was then finally removed from the U.S. pharmacopoeia by then.
I see.
So, but in the late 1800s, there were lots of applications where doctors would actually tell people to use it. One thing that's kind of interesting is that people would be told to use it for asthma, would be told to smoke it for asthma, which I'm not sure that would be a good application. But, you kind of see that it was in like the doctor's tool bags up until that time. So the early 1900s, there's a couple of different things that happened. For one thing, the creation of the DuPont company, and they were creating rope, and they kind of wanted to dominate that market, and hemp was used to make rope during that time period. The other thing too that happened is that there was a big push. We had also alcohol started to be a bigger thing in the United States. We were,
right.
This was prior to the alcohol prohibition. So it was kind of like, we need to get rid of this. And one of the things that, and also the introduction of pharmaceuticals. So
right.
What does it say? Mass-produced pharmaceuticals. Okay. So around that time period is also when they were starting to look at mass-produced pharmaceuticals, where you could just go to the store and buy a bottle of whatever. And so there was a lot of push from a lot of different companies. Like, they saw that as more of like competition and kind of wanting to dominate certain markets. And so sort of these, and you can Google this, and, it's always like really shocking to people. But it's like, yeah, if you look it up, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, it really says that. You can look at some really old, newspaper, ads and different things like that, material from that time period. And basically the whole thing that came out was that it was very important for white men to not let their white women use marijuana. And it will actually say in some of the materials that if they use marijuana, it will make them start listening to jazz music. It will make them want to have sex with black men.
Oh my gosh.
It literally says that. Like, that is a literal, look it up. And then also at the time, most of it was coming across from Mexico. And so it was kind of like pushed into the communities of like, marijuana is very trashy. It is what African Americans use. It is what Mexicans use. And good, upstanding white people should never use marijuana.
Like a propaganda campaign.
Yes, very much propaganda. Like, you will be lazy, you will be stupid, this is trashy. Like, you never want to use this because it's just beneath you, kind of thing. So that's around the time. And then, of course, years, we're talking probably a couple decades later is when the Reefer Madness came out. And the Reefer Madness movie is absolutely ridiculous. Like, if you watch it, you're just sitting there like, oh my goodness. It's really something. And I think watching it now, like 2026, it's really something to behold, because we've been through so much since then that like, the kind of what they're portraying is more like what you would see with people on fentanyl.
Yeah.
And so that really was what was being put out in the community is, for that time period of like, this is what this will do to you. And the Reefer Madness movie is what gave way to the kind of idea, and like you've heard this before, the gateway drug.
Yep.
And so the Reefer Madness put forth this idea that marijuana was a gateway drug, and that if you started using marijuana, then surely you will start using cocaine or heroin next. And here we are, fast forward all these years later, and now in the business, we like to call it the exit drug. And there's so much research to back that up. So when we talk about it now being the exit drug, what we're referring to is exiting from pharmaceutical use and exiting specifically from opioids. And there's lots of states out west that have really, really great data on that, showing specific programs that have been used for specific demographics of people, showing that cannabis is a very good substance to use to wean people off of opioids and keep them off of opioids. So it's interesting that, we had the gateway drug, but we're not going to call it that anymore. Now we'll call it the exit drug.
As I'm listening to the history lesson, which is what it is, and I'm very appreciative of that. I can't help, and this is probably a conversation for a whole other show, but, around the turn of the century into the 30s, into the 40s and 50s was the time that the powers to be that rule the world truly were defining what industries they would control.
Absolutely.
And certainly pharmaceuticals was part of that conversation. So
yes.
My words, that's where I'm going with this, to say it sure seems awful fitting that it was good for thousands of years. And suddenly at this particular time, it's no longer,
right.
Worth anything, and how bad of a person you're going to become, should you decide to use it.
Right.
Yeah, I can't help but think that.
Yeah. And I get really passionate about that, because I'm very freedom driven. I'm very libertarian. And, it's interesting. There's several quotes from our forefathers about hemp, because especially here in Kentucky, hemp was farmed regularly, not just, by Europeans, but Native Americans also harvested hemp in this area. And it is a plant that has been here in our state for a very long time. It would grow wild, several hundred years ago. It is a part of our heritage. And I don't think that the government or the pharmaceutical companies or any other companies for that matter, have the inalienable right to tell us that we don't have access to what the earth gives us.
Which is exactly the propaganda campaign, right? Just to drive everybody away from it.
And, sometimes you'll hear the argument, well, cocaine grows as a plant as well. It does, but it has to be cut with something. It's apple, it's tomatoes and onions. It's completely different. The argument with marijuana and with cannabis, it's a dead argument, because, anybody can grow it, and you do not have to cut it with anything, and you do not have to spray it with anything. It is natural medicine. It's just like growing mint in your garden or basil in your garden or anything like that. The difference is that it has some psychoactive components which have to be considered.
So for your role as the educator consultant, for what we're doing tonight, that this propaganda campaign that we're referencing, and again, this is my impression of it, right? It's still wholly and fully intact today. So I'm going to own my part of it to say there's still a stigma that I really have about marijuana, cannabis, whatever we're going to call it. And you please correct me if I say something stupid, but how do we correct the stigma then? Because there does certainly feel like this pendulum is shifting to this broader acceptance of cannabis. How do we shift this stigma of that marijuana is bad?
So, I have a lot to add to that, actually. So part of how so that's what I feel like I've been doing. Like I said, I started, being open and involved in advocacy in 1998, but it was really in 2017 when I started teaching people on a broader scale. And, before I know it, I have my 90-year-old grandmother using CBD and my mom using CBD, who's never even tried marijuana a day in her life. And, I think that, and that's one reason I felt fortunate and empowered since 2017, is that it is through people like me. It is through people being honest, educating, and speaking out openly. The other thing too is that it's important for people to get the right information, and that's where I really come into play. And and that's why it's hard for me to not work for free, because when I work with people, they're always so appreciative, because it's difficult if you just like pull the phone up and go marijuana, there's no telling what you're going to get. And then also a lot of times people have some sort of motive behind that. Like, oh, well, you're going to sell me something, or you own the company. And, people could say that about me too. But like I said, don't worry, I'm only making tens and tens of pennies. I don't have a motivation other than I'm very passionate about it. But one of,
and I'll attest to that. This is a passion for you.
It is. And I feel like the stigma, it has changed. There's a couple things I want to say about that, because it sort of depends on where you live. Or a lot depends on where you live. So the stigma definitely starts to get changed by better education. That's number one. Better access, because the stigma can't change while it's still under prohibition. So if you live in a state that has complete prohibition, which there's not a lot of them left, but if you live in a state like that, then you can only purchase on the black market. Well, it's very difficult to get rid of a stigma if I have to go to a drug dealer to get what I need, right? The stigma will stay intact. So the stigma starts to help break down when we actually have safe and realistic pathways to obtain the plant. The other thing too is I think this is definitely something that here in Kentucky, because I have to be careful when I'm talking about these subjects. I don't want to be too broad, because you think like, oh, cannabis looks the same. It does not. It looks different all over the United States. So even though we are one country, it is very much different when you break it down into areas of how is cannabis legal? And then also, how do the people there feel about it? What is the relationship to the plant?
I didn't know if you meant the physical strains themselves.
No, not that. No, but like, what is access to it legally? But then also, what is like the cultural acceptance of the plant in those areas? And then like, what kind of history do they have with the plant? With law enforcement here in Kentucky, there has been a low priority for a while. So let's see, I actually I worked on that, on the Lexington Task Force Committee in 2019. And what we were trying to do then, they had already successfully done that in Louisville. We were trying to do that in Lexington. That was something that Kentucky Normal was kind of heading, and they had asked me to be on that committee. And I, of course, was like, sure. There were several of us that, were meeting with council members in Lexington and wanting Lexington to enact an ordinance that basically were directing Lexington law enforcement to make marijuana a low priority. Louisville had already enacted that ordinance. Now, it's kind of like this whole convoluted issue with cannabis. Like when you look at the state and the federal level, it's kind of the same with the city and the state. Mm-hmm. Louisville enacted this ordinance, but it did not exactly align with Kentucky state law. But sort of what it was, the point of the ordinance was to start setting a standard that the government and the people no longer wanted there to be a focus on marijuana in regards to law enforcement. So this larger cities were trying to direct that to their local law enforcement that does not take care of the issue, as you can speak to, at the state level, because you still have the state telling the state police to go out and look for illegal plants and things like that.
Right.
But what the cities were trying to do is that if I pull somebody over and they have a small bag of weed on them, can't I just give that back to them if they're not inebriated? So as long as they're able to drive, but they just had that on their person, is it worth the paperwork? Is it worth the money to prosecute it? And really, when we were trying to work on this in 2019, 2020 came quickly and everything changed. Nobody cared about a lot of stuff. Everything changed, so it just got dropped. But the issue that I saw when I went and spoke to several council members that shall remain unnamed in Lexington, the thing that they told me was that they felt like it was a moot ordinance because Lexington law enforcement was already making it a low priority. So they just considered it kind of like, an additional ordinance. Do we really need an additional ordinance? We're wanting to do an additional ordinance to direct police officers and the agency as a whole to this. But if the agency is already acting in that way, what's the point of the ordinance to begin with? It's a waste of time. And I agreed with them, but I also agreed with getting things on paper. It's a good idea.
I was going to say, I would disagree with that.
With dissolving prohibition. Yeah, because then it leaves it up to the officers.
And tomorrow it may become a priority depending on who's in office there.
Right. And you, of course, know that better than anyone. We can say, oh, that's what the department's doing as a whole, but there could be a sergeant that has a different feeling on that.
Right.
And then we could see a lot of petty marijuana arrests. So I do agree that having it on paper, and having it as an ordinance would make more sense. So, but overall, when you look at Lexington and Louisville, here's the thing is it's like, the opioids smack you in the face. You cannot miss it. You can drive through either of those cities and it's so obvious what's going on that the police can barely handle that. I mean, they don't have enough bodies to deal with that, to deal with fentanyl, to deal with the opioids that are on the street. Marijuana is a no-brainer at this point for them. And I have heard on good authority, because the police officers are being trained now in what Kentucky medical marijuana looks like, what are the procedures for that. And what I'm hearing on good authority is that they're coming to the trainings because they're required to. They're listening to them and going, yep, this is no problem because this is low priority already for us. So
yeah, that's
there's
interesting.
just not a push anymore to arrest people for marijuana. It's just a waste of time and effort and manpower and money.
So you're thinking about hiring a private investigator, huh? Think knowledge, experience, and trust. Think DPJ Consulting. Listen, we're the folks you want on your team. Whether it's a criminal matter, corporate, or administrative issue, or maybe something more personal, you need to make the right choice for you. Our house of expertise at DPJ Consulting can help you with investigations, and that could mean a whole lot of different things. Pre-employment background checks, personal VIP security, and so much more. Check us out at dpjconsulting.com. Follow us on all of our social media platforms, or give us a call at 855-TEAM-DPJ. That's 855-TEAM-DPJ. Give us a call. It costs nothing to talk. It costs you everything if we don't. So I was not aware of your, I don't say legislative efforts, but say Lexington legislative efforts, the part where you talk about working for the council and those type of things. I wasn't aware of that. It's easy to see that it's a low priority for law enforcement anymore. Yeah. Whether people support that or not, that's not the point. The point is it's easy to see it's a low priority now. And I can certainly reflect back to my time in law enforcement, which I retired before any of these meetings happened. So I think I'm giving you a perspective from the old way of thinking, perhaps. Mm-hmm. We were under the training of it's a gateway drug. Mm-hmm. We were under the training of you got to solve that or you're going to have bigger problems. So a lot of the stuff that I think you and I are relating to this propaganda machine that was there. Mm-hmm. And it certainly was a focus. I think as I drive around now and you can smell marijuana. Mm-hmm. And I thought, man, back in the day,
they'd light you up for that.
Yeah. You're stopping cars and searching home.
Right. Kicking indoors for weed.
Right. There was a thing that if you, and I may misstate this, but if you went to an apartment, say for a barking dog or something, benign, right? Doesn't matter. But you smell marijuana, you had the ability to search the residence for what may turn out to be just a roach at this point, right. A small bit. And so it's changed quite a bit. Mm-hmm. But I wasn't aware of your efforts behind the scene. I just thought, well, I guess it's just modern day times or no one cares as much.
Well, and also too, I think I would like to point out that, there's a lot of people that work behind the scenes. I have met some very incredible people over the years. Facebook showed me this precious memory a few days ago of when I took my children to Frankfurt, for us trying to advocate for, on a lobby day for some of the marijuana bills that were being proposed. This was pre-COVID. I think it's like in 2018. And they had these great signs. There has been people like myself who have, like you said, nobody knows, maybe you do know, but there's a lot of people who have been advocating for decades, for prohibition to end. And unfortunately, sometimes, people advocate at the risk of their reputation, their jobs, what people think about them, and things like that. One thing I do want to mention, just because I think it's important for people listening so that we're always clear. I like to always be clear when we talk about this subject, is that even though it is low priority, they can still charge you with it. So that is something to keep in mind. And this is what I always tell people, it is low priority for Lexington Police. However, if they pull you over or they catch you out acting a fool and they're going to charge you with something else and you also have a bag of weed on you, they're definitely going to add that onto your list of charges. So I think it's really important for people to understand that although it's low priority, you will still go to jail for it now.
That's a great reminder to put here to say, on the books here, it's still illegal. Yeah. Right. They may not be pulling you over or the things we just talked about, but
depends on who you get.
Well, true too. But it's certainly still illegal. Possession of marijuana is still on our books.
It is. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, interesting. So I think my opinion of this started to change around 2020, and you touched very briefly, just in passing, about COVID and those type of things. And again, that's a whole other conversation. But I think my opinion of this started to change around there, because it just seemed to be, for me, the concept of the propaganda machine is out there. And I don't want to be so negative about it, but at the same time, it just made us start questioning everything.
Oh, be negative about it. It's wrong.
Yeah.
It's wrong. And that's what I say.
Well, it's kind of back to that stigma, right?
If you Google the propaganda material, you'll be appalled at the things were said. Like I said, literally, there's literal things that say that your white woman will want to listen to jazz music. Let's think about how ridiculous that sounds right now.
I love jazz music.
Although I would argue that jazz music under the influence of cannabis is awesome, but I've never felt compelled. It's ridiculous. And the thing is that when you read some of that, you're like, people really believed this? Like it's hard to imagine, but they did. I think, like you mentioning COVID, that's interesting because I've kind of observed just personally that I think that COVID really knocked down a lot of walls for people. Mm-hmm. People were home. There was nothing to do but get on the internet. And the other thing too is because we were also really unsure of what we were being told and
Correct.
What was true and what wasn't. It started making people question what other things they had been told that weren't true. And it's funny when you started naming off the list of things you were told under your law enforcement training. I thought of something that I always thought was interesting because I have a lot of friends that are current or mostly retired law enforcement. And they all know. They know me. They know what I do. They know what I stand for. They don't care. They still love me. One of the things they've told me over the years is that they were trained and told that you could never smoke weed because it could be sprayed with something. That it could be sprayed. And, I even heard a couple years ago, a deputy that I know in Lexington, he said, they told us in our last training it could be sprayed with fentanyl.
Yeah.
And I was literally like just blinking my eyes at him. And I'm like, they're not going to spray weed with fentanyl. Yeah,
or PCP from back in the day.
They're just not going to do that. You don't have to do, it was really surprising to me that that kind of stuff was being told to law enforcement. And, because I've known a lot of different officers over the years, I can tell it's very difficult for them to understand how do I feel about this, because sometimes they'll know people like me. It's a really good friend that they respect and love, and maybe they have a family member, or they just out in the field seeing people that they encounter who only have weed on them. It's kind of hard to be like, oh, I don't know, I just don't feel like this is like the other things, but because the training is still so geared towards that, and I'm glad and hoping that is now changing with the legitimate medical programs, which it has been changing across the country. But now, we're talking about here at home. And one thing, too, I brought before we move on about that, you would ask about the stigma. I brought a couple of books to show you, because it's always so interesting to people. We get honed in on where we live. This is the way it is. It's different in other places. And out west, cannabis has been legal in so many states for such a long period of time that it's past tense for them. And so there's authors that actually have books that are for children. I brought one that's called Tiny Little Plant. Mommy Loves to Smoke a Bowl. and What's Growing in Grandma's Garden. And these are books that were written by West Coast authors, most of them from California. I think she was from Oregon. And they are children's books that are designed to teach children about cannabis. And I think that that is good. I think that we should not have any hesitation in doing that. My children know more about the plant than most adults that I speak to. I can tell you that for sure. And it's important that we not hide that from the children, in my opinion.
Right.
Just like if I woke up and did not feel well and I had a back problem today and I was going to take a muscle relaxer that had been given to me by my doctor, fulfilled by my pharmacy, and I'm going to take it, and it means that mommy's not going to be able to do much today but lay on the couch. I'm not going to hide that from my child. I'm going to be honest with them about that and say, my back is really hurting and I've had to take some medicine for that. And it's going to make me tired today. There's no reason for us to hide it from the children. And so there are some books out there. These are actually kind of old. There's probably better stuff. It's been a long time since I've looked for that. But I think that it's important to have those conversations with the children and the younger generations. And I think it's going to be a non-issue at all, completely in the future.
Right. I agree with that, because it's going to take this effort that we're engaging with tonight and future conversations, which is what I hope the episode does for this topic. But to your point, if I had some pain and I took a muscle relaxer or whatever else, I wouldn't shy away from that conversation.
Right.
To say, hey, the doctor prescribed this to me.
Your daughter that, no problem with you.
No problem at all.
Neighbor, anybody.
Anybody. Because it's the accepted process. But I don't know that I would be open enough to say, hey, I'm going to smoke or take whatever, the cannabis gives me. Mm-hmm. That still feels like that has this barrier put up to it, and it's difficult to talk about. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I say do it loud and proud with your chest out. And I have for such a long time now that I think that is what has empowered me, but also made so many people in that age group that I'm talking about respect me. I think that they knew me. They know my family. They know me growing up. They know who I am as a person. And for me to have no reserve on being honest with about that speaks to my integrity, and that it makes them trust and respect me, and it empowers them to want to do the same. And that's what I love to see in other people. I'm like, you should not be afraid of this. Like I will argue this. Like I said, I've taken my kids to Frankfurt. Prior to 2020, I took the kids to Frankfurt 2 or 3 times on lobby days to try to get marijuana bills passed. Like, I literally, I wish I could find it. I'll find it for you before I leave tonight. It's the cutest thing ever. Is my little baby in a stroller holding a sign that says my 89-year-old grandmother deserves medical cannabis.
Yeah.
So, it's a conversation that, you can tell yourself that I can't do this, or you can tell yourself you can, but there's really nothing stopping you.
Well, I guess for you and I to be our overlap of conversation about this, I will just say you have been passionate, but for reasons that you truly believe in. Mm-hmm. Yes. So it's not that you just want to smoke tonight or do whatever, or party it up or whatever somebody wants to assign to you. It's not that. It truly is a much deeper, passionate topic for you that you truly believe in. And so that comes across.
It is. And let's speak to that for just a second, because there's the, so where Kentucky is right now is like with the medical marijuana. There's always, when this conversation comes up, especially around the stigma, there's a difference between, okay, so there's medical marijuana, there's recreational marijuana. So let's be clear. It is the same marijuana. There's no difference. It is the same thing. It is the same actual product that we're using. The difference is only the legislation. Now, for me, and I've always been very open and clear about this, I believe in full legalization. The difference is that recreational use would be that anyone 21 years of age can go and purchase it, and they can go do whatever they want with it, regardless if they have a health issue or not. I believe that's what should happen. The reasons that I believe that is that A, it's a natural plant. I don't believe that the government has the inalienable right to prohibit that from us. B, when you look at the safety profile, and this is where it really gets like, when people start to do any sort of research into cannabis, this is a no-brainer. Because when you look at the safety profile, cannabis has a better safety profile than ibuprofen. So think about that one for a second. So you are more likely to get sick or have an adverse reaction to ibuprofen than you are cannabis. Well, then if we go and try to compare it to alcohol, it is a big difference. And you as a police officer probably know this really well. So, someone can, for the most part, maintain if they are using cannabis. Whereas if they drink too much, it's a completely different ballgame. You don't see a lot of car accidents that are because of cannabis use. Now, they may have been using another substance or they may have been drinking and smoking weed, but you don't see cannabis as the main contributor to these kinds of things. You also cannot get addicted to it. You also cannot overdose from it. You cannot die from it. So, when you look at that in comparison to things that are already legal, like cigarettes, like chewing tobacco, like alcohol. When you look at the safety profile on that, then you realize, well, there's really no reason for the government to prohibit this. If people want to smoke weed to relax, not because they have a health problem, just because they want to relax, when I get off work, if I want to go drink a beer with my husband in the backyard, it's nobody's business. I can do that. Nobody cares. Well, if I want to use marijuana, why can't I? Because if when you look at the health, it's the whole gamut, it's kind of just it's ridiculous that it's remained this way, but that is how I feel. But the space in which I work in, is that I want people to be safe. And so when I talk to my customers, my clients, anybody, like we're talking here now, I want to make sure we're clear on the mic. I like to speak in terms with people about what is legal, because I don't ever want to encourage or give anybody advice that is going to jeopardize their freedom, or anything like that. So in regards to now, it's mostly what I deal with is trying to help medical patients, because there is a medical application for cannabis. And I would argue that the medical application outweighs the recreational application, but I do feel like the recreational application should be allowed.
Yeah. We'll come back to the statute here in just a second. In preparation for conversations like these, I've really tried hard to say, okay, David, come up with those examples where marijuana caused the reason for you as law enforcement to show up and be involved. Now, I could probably speak all night on the alcohol involved.
I'm sure.
Complaints that we had to respond to.
And deaths you've probably seen in car accidents.
Oh my gosh, and on, right? I'm struggling to find one incident where I can attribute the use of marijuana or cannabis to the reason, other than somebody smelled it and called in, right? I'm talking about a contributing factor to the complaint. I'm not ready to say it doesn't exist. I think that's still wired in me, right? Because of my career and training and upbringing and all those things. That's still hardwired. I'm struggling to say it doesn't exist.
Because it might in certain situations.
It may in certain situations.
You may have people that delay around and smoke weed all day and smoke it with their kids in the room and giving their children secondhand smoke. There's definitely people in the world who use cannabis in an inappropriate way.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But when you look at the data, and that's the thing, we can be told day and night that there's no research, there's no data, but there is. You just have to go look for it. And there is. And like you said, you have a firsthand account. You're not looking on your computer to see, how many people died from alcohol. But from being in the field.
Yeah.
And if you actually go in and you start looking at the data, you start realizing oh, wow, it's such a stark difference between alcohol and cannabis that you're why don't they let people smoke weed? You're maybe if more people smoked weed and drank less alcohol, we would have a much peaceful and more peaceful community. Because it's kind of a joke, it's what can you expect from someone that's, smoked some weed? Oh, well, you can expect they're on the couch. You can expect they're hungry for some chips, maybe a Mountain Dew or an OA. There's, and obviously there's exceptions to this, but I would argue, and I think that you kind of are speaking to this, we can see really serious, terrible things happen where cannabis is involved, but it's not a standalone. Right. They're also on opioids. They're also have been drinking. It's very rare that you see that person is just using marijuana. But I'm sure there's definitely some violent assholes out there that just smoke weed only. But, you know, like,
yeah, certainly.
When you look at the data, it speaks for itself.
Yeah. And I know I've had multitude of calls about that, but not as the contributing factor to some other crime or incident that's happened.
Yeah. And a lot of the advocates don't like this opinion that I have, because I promote so I believe in I try to live in reality. And in reality, our best path forward is responsible access through reasonable legislation. Now, what happens with advocacy is that most of the groups who spend decades and decades, and at this point, gosh, some of them like probably close to 70 years, advocating for marijuana legalization, you see kind of this opinion that it's all or nothing. Like, it needs to be 100% illegal. The government should have never took this away from us to begin with. They shouldn't have their hands in it. We should be able to do what we want with it. We shouldn't have to buy it from a dispensary. I can grow it in my backyard. I can, you know. I agree with that. I do. Like, to my soul, I agree with, like, the government doesn't have the right to take plants from us. But that is not realistic.
Right.
In the world that we live in, this is where we live. This is how it has been now for almost 100 years. Our best path forward, and especially because our country has become so driven on drug trafficking. And I'm not talking about marijuana. You know,
right.
You know that. I'm talking about cocaine. I'm talking about crack. I'm talking about heroin. I mean, you know, it's just gone the gamut. Now we're to fentanyl. Now who knows what they're doing now? I mean, we have the pharmaceutical. I mean, you know, name it. Our, you know, drug addiction is an American problem. It's an American issue. It's an American epidemic. You don't see it in other countries. It's here. It's us. We're so privileged that we can afford to get addicted to drugs. We don't have to worry about food. We can spend our money on drugs. It is unfair that this has happened to this plant. But nonetheless, this is the world we live in. And we have to find paths forward that make sense. And when I have 60 and 70-year-olds coming to me with cancer, and they've never smoked a joint a day in their life because they grew up in households where their daddies told them that only low-life people smoked weed.
Right.
They're scared, you know, but they've learned enough. They're more afraid of the opioids, you know, and they've learned enough to know, like, I want to try this. We need a very reasonable path forward for that. And that is through legalization with regulation, so that when they go and buy products, they know exactly what they have.
So there's a couple of legislative things that have happened over the, I guess, last couple of years. But let's go back just a bit further before we get into specific laws, if that's okay. Yeah. Let's talk about how, like, for example, hemp-based products have been legal here for a while, right?
Right.
That had to come. Did that come through a legislative change to allow the hemp-based product? Yes,
it's the only good thing Mitch McConnell ever did, and I will say that on record. I will say that on record. It is the only good thing Mitch McConnell ever helped with. Yes, and Kentucky is who got the federal hemp bill passed. And it's because the plant is so important to our history, and that's something I want to definitely bring up. So when I was discussing about the stigma, and it depends on which area you're talking about, and this is probably important for us to discuss before we move into where Kentucky is at now. So one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that Kentucky has a love for cannabis, and we have a long history. And the one thing I like to tell people, and I always say, like, go fact check me on this, please. I would love for you to do it. So Kentucky has always been one of the largest illegal growing states in the nation. And so every year, High Times Magazine, which has been around forever, I think since like the 1970s, I believe, maybe even longer than that. Every year they post like the data, you know, it's going into the new year. They post the data from the previous years, and they will list out for you the states that had the largest numbers of illegal plants extracted. which means they got caught. Right.
Which is coming from the federal government data.
In the states. Yeah. The state, state governments are sending out the state trooper, and going and extracting plants. So Kentucky and California are always at the top. So they literally rival each other every year. And you can go back and look at this. Like, this has been going on forever. So like one year it'll be California and Kentucky's number 2. And then the next year, Kentucky's number 1 and California's number 2. And then the next year, it's always Kentucky and California, which is so funny because it's like we have nothing else in common. But we do love the plant. Now, one of the reasons why is because it grows so well in our environments. But then also because the culture has such a long history of growing the plant. And so it's always been interesting to me. And I've talked a lot about California, not so much nowadays, but back when I was doing my classes in 2017, 2018, we would talk a lot about this. Because we didn't have legal weed yet. There is extra challenges when you come from a state who has a long history of black market marijuana, of growing. And I think I always like to point this part out too. So when you consider that Kentucky is always in the top 2 of illegal, they're only reporting what the state police actually found. So that's not including what they didn't find.
I'll put an asterisk on actually found.
Right.
Yeah.
What they actually found
reported.
And burned. That's
actually reported.
Or reported.
Yeah.
Yes. And they usually burn it, which is awful. But anyways.
Right.
So that's where that data is coming from. So it's actually more than what is being, reported, of course. The other thing too, that we want to consider is that when you take areas like especially Kentucky, and you consider that there is literally that much that's being illegally grown, I don't think there's anyone that can convince me that there are not law enforcement that know that there are not mayors that know that, sheriffs and deputies that know that. Because they're not growing that in Lexington. That's growing out in the counties. That's growing out on the farms. You literally will hear of families who have illegally grown marijuana for 100 years.
Yeah.
You think the sheriff of that county doesn't know that? And the mayor doesn't know that? And the council doesn't? The magistrates don't know? It's a long history. My point is that people benefit from that. And California had the same situation. You had these entire areas. Now California was different as it's just a larger landmass with less law enforcement officers. But you take this culture of people that have grown for such a long period of time on the black market, and then you try to shift them to the white market. There is some very difficult growing pains that happen. And that's why I knew that Kentucky was going to be very almost at the bottom, like one of the last states to legalize.
Certainly. Because
there's a lot of advantage for people here for it to stay illegal. And it's funny, since we got medical marijuana, I keep up with the lobbyist groups online and stuff. And when I see people, just random people, not the lobbyist groups, but just people commenting on their socials, you still see this push in the community here of like, oh, don't go buy that from the dispensary. I can get it for cheaper from my guy down the road, and I'd grow it myself.
Buy local.
That's right. Buy local.
Kentucky proud.
Yes. And people are there's just this whole uproar. But I knew it was going to be like this because this is exactly what California went to. California legalized in 1996. Keep that in mind. California's been legal since 1996. Their medical program started then. They still have a shit show program. Their program is shit. It's been the shit the whole time. And the problem is because you have these different situations that are very complex. And Kentucky is going to experience that. We are now, it's very difficult to convince people to buy it legally when they can obtain it just fine on the black market.
What an incredible power shift that has to happen. And to me, that's logical. It's going to take a few years before that power shift goes.
And, that's one thing that I always thought was interesting, with the legislators, every single year for, oh my gosh, I don't know, probably at least 15 years and really longer. It would pop up every now and again. There would be legislators in Frankfurt that would propose bills, put forth a bill and try to get signatures on it to try to legalize marijuana here. And one of the things, their cohorts would start to say is we don't want to bring marijuana here. And it's it's already here. by the way. Yeah. Like, do you need the data from the state police to eliminate you to this fact? It is already here. It's not a matter of bringing it here. It's a matter of shifting it from a black market to a white market and to a legal market. And the thing is that I feel really passionately about arguing this. And if you ever listen to the legislators when they get pulled into these rooms and have on these committees over the years in Frankfurt and have to start making these decisions about medical marijuana, most of the time they'll vote yes, and they'll say they don't want to, but they're going to. And the reason why is because they know people with cancer, and they don't feel, they can't go home and sleep at night knowing that they're going to vote no on something. That why should my neighbor next door that's 80 years old have to go buy black market illegal weed from a drug dealer to try to help with their cancer? Why? Why do they have to do that? That's not fair. That's not right. You know, there's a problem here. So,
and that politician's I'm not defending them. I'm just saying they're in this weird spot where they may want to say it, but they also have to play to that traditional base that says marijuana bad, cannabis bad. So you got to
absolutely,
take care of that base, but also try to figure out how to help the cancer patient too.
Right. And it's very hard for them because, nowadays it's public information who their campaign donors are. And if you go in and do a little bit of research, you'll realize that most of their donors are pharmaceutical companies and hospitals and doctors' offices and large medical practices. And that entire machine works against cannabis.
So that brings us to 2020 and the pandemic, or I even hate using that word, the COVID machine, which is where we started questioning everything that was there. Just something didn't feel right. And it feels like the rest of the society has said, yeah, let's just start questioning everything. And so I've purchased and used the hemp-based products. A great way to relax and to get me some good sleep and good rest. So I'm a fan of that. Those products have been around for a while. So did that become legal when it's a few years ago that hemp suddenly was the biggest shiny object in Kentucky and it was going to save the economy and all those things? Is that when these hemp-based THC products became on the market? We are so glad to have Ugly Tint as a sponsor to the show. My longtime friend Kenny Dietrich is a subject matter expert in modern survival, bushcrafting, and preparedness. As he challenges us on the show, be prepared for the disaster most likely to happen to you. But let me tell you, Ugly Tint is so much more than just disaster preparedness. You need to check out the website at uglytent.com. That's UGLYTENT.com for a complete list of their products, their classes, and all the services that Kenny offers. There's a lot that I think you'll find interesting at uglytent.com. Again, just a neat place to go. So whether it's for camping, maybe it's a hike, maybe it's just trying to be in the outdoors for a little bit, uglytent.com is filled with the products and the services that you want. Not to mention you have a true expert as a resource for you. Listen, while you're there, use the promo code JUDE, that's lowercase JUDE, and that code will get you 10% off your total purchase. That's a pretty good deal for some really cool stuff. Anyway, check out Kenny at uglytent.com.
So prior to 2020, when farmers in Kentucky were operating under the hemp bill, the original farm bill, the biggest attraction, it was kind of interesting because there was a lot of farmers who came into it that actually hated marijuana. And I feel like they were sort of convinced to try this pathway because they were told by companies, it's not marijuana. And it's like, well, marijuana is actually a slang word that I usually don't like to use. Cannabis is the plant, and it is cannabis, whether it's hemp, it's the same plant. So we have different strains of it. But whether it's hemp or whether it's what you're buying at the dispensary, it is in fact the same exact plant. Now, it made farmers feel a little better to know that, oh no, it's a little different. Yeah, it is different. The compounds in it are different. The cannabinoids in it are different. There's different dominance in the plants, if they're CBD dominant or THC dominant. And the most important thing is that the farmers were being assured that they were, operating within the law. The biggest thing that was attractive to Kentucky about it was a couple things. One part is that the plant has such a long history with our state. I mean, we were the largest hemp producer in the United States before Prohibition. So hemp was Kentucky's number one cash crop prior to Prohibition. And there's been times during the Prohibition era that there has been little brief time periods where the government has allowed Kentuckians to grow hemp for agriculture, like for purposes of like rope and different things like that. So it's long been known that Kentuckians can grow hemp well. Hemp grows well here. So there was the history, but then there was also the fact, like I was saying earlier, that there was a lot of tobacco farmers that were suddenly, they had the equipment, they had the barns, they had the land, but they no longer had tobacco. So it was a very simple transition, because if you can grow tobacco and you get the right seeds, you can definitely grow cannabis and be good at it. And so it was sort of like a renewed, option for those farmers. Now, when we started to see the introduction of the drinks and Delta 8, Delta 9, and these kinds of things, that would have definitely been post 2020. And I have to be honest with you, and I've mentioned already once, like, sometimes I say things that other people that are in this space would disagree with me, but I stand on what I believe. So I'm just going to speak to where I come from. And this is what I tell my clients. So I don't know a whole lot about where we are right now with the THC drinks and the Delta 8 and the Delta 9. It's definitely hot right now. If you Google it, you will see that there are state legislation issues, there are federal legislation issues. There's a big push to get rid of those things, to legislate them differently. I don't keep up with that. And I get all the emails, I scan them and delete them. The reason why is because I don't promote those products. And not because I don't sell them, but because I don't support them. So from the position that I work in and how I talk to my clients, medical marijuana patients and the community, like I said, when I first started doing this, most of the people that came to me were people I already knew. And I had this really deep desire to only tell them 100% truths, and to never encourage them to do anything that I was not comfortable with that could potentially harm them. I felt passionately about that because these are my neighbors. These are people, like I said, I went to school with their kids, my reputation stood on that. And then also I speak like for myself, like, what do I use? What am I comfortable with? The introduction of Delta 8 and Delta 9, here's the thing is that whenever we're going to isolate Delta 8 or Delta 9, there is a very large processing that has to go on to isolate that cannabinoid. And basically what it's been is sort of like a workaround to still sort of make people feel a little high, but not violate the law. And the entire time it's been illegal. And that's the thing. I've been getting calls since, forever, for years. I'll get them randomly still. People will call me because they'll find my number online through my website and they'll go, oh, do you have any Delta 8? And I'm like, no, I do not. And by the way, it is illegal. And people are always very like, what? No, it's not. They sell it at the gas station by my house. And I'm like, good for the gas station.
Right.
And I do have some acquaintances who have businesses that sell some of those kinds of products. And, if they were here, they would completely disagree with me. I'm like, no, these are great products. We sell these. The thing is that there's a lot of processing that goes in isolating those cannabinoids. And by the time you get that cannabinoid isolated, you really don't have plant medicine anymore. You just have chemicals.
Yeah.
And I don't encourage people to do that. If you're going to consume Delta 8, there's a very good chance that you could be over consuming ethanol and isopropyl alcohol or butane, because they have to process that down to isolate that cannabinoid. that cannabinoid is not prevalent in the plant. They have isolated it. It's very, we want whole plant medicine.
Right.
Whole plant medicine is the flower. It is the bud. It is weed. It is marijuana. Like what everybody, that's weed. That's what we want. When we start making things into drinks and into tinctures and into all these other things that are sold at the gas stations, by the time that product gets to your mouth, there may be no cannabis in it. So you're really just consuming chemicals. And it's actually the other reason I don't recommend it at all for people because I think it's dangerous. It's not regulated. And the other thing too is that it's bad for advocacy. It's bad for the cause because we've suddenly seen people go into the hospital for weed. They didn't go to hospital for the weed. You know what they went to the hospital for?
The other shit that's in it.
Delta 8. That's right. They didn't go to the hospital because they smoked a joint. They didn't go to the hospital because they smoked a bowl of weed or vaporized some weed. They went to the hospital because they consumed some kind of Delta 8 garbage that they got at the gas station. But what happens is when they go into the hospital and they tell people that, that's what gets documented. That's what fights against legalization. Because then they can look at that data and go, oh, look right here. We had people showing up at the hospital really sick off of marijuana. And actually, they couldn't even figure out what was wrong with them. And they were showing negative on drug tests. Oh, I bet they were. Because they're not testing. They don't even know what chemicals to test for. That's the thing.
Yeah.
So that has been like this whole thing that's sort of emerging. And now the THC beverage thing is becoming like a really big issue. We can consume cannabis through drinking and eating. And I think you have some questions about that here in a minute. And we'll talk about that. That is a good delivery method and it has certain applications, but not the crap you're buying at the store. I'm sorry. It's going to make so many people mad. But
I wouldn't expect you to have any other position, as a leader in this field and an advocate and educator and consultant, all those things.
Let's try to be honest.
And you are, right? My full knowledge of you is honesty and transparency. And that's not just because you're in front of me. That's sincerely, I mean that.
Thank you.
But it also feels like you'd be taking a step backwards if suddenly you're advocating for a half step or this thing is okay and one day we'll get there. That wouldn't be speaking to your heart and to your passion. No. The intermediary product of hemp is not what you're shooting for.
We don't want Delta 8.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like I was teaching these classes. I became a certified educator in, what year was it? Like 2019, 2018, 2019 is when I became certified as a cannabis educator. I did that entire certification process. And guess how many times they mentioned Delta 8? Zero. That's right. It's just dangerous. I mean,
so for the uneducated, which would be me. And what I envision maybe the listeners of this episode are, is there a Delta 8, Delta 9, Delta 10, and all these hybrids that are promoted in the gummy products, et cetera? I mean, is that a thing?
So, well, they're definitely, cannabinoids in the plant. But that, here's the thing is that when we're looking at cannabis, so we're looking at it from my position, we're looking at it from two pathways. We're looking at it as a medical application and we're looking at it as a recreational application. Both instances, we only want the THC. Now, CBD plays a part in that as well. There's definitely applications for CBD. I still sell CBD. I tell my medical marijuana clients, especially if they're first-time users of THC, that they need to have a bottle of CBD on hand. CBD has its application, but when it boils down to it, no, we want the THC. That's where the magic happens. Now, the plant has all these cannabinoids in it. So they have the major cannabinoids and the minor cannabinoids. CBD and THC are major cannabinoids. There are tons of minor cannabinoids. Every year they discover more. The applications of those minor cannabinoids are very exciting because we are seeing the potential that some of the minor cannabinoids could help with things like type 2 diabetes, Parkinson's. I mean, it's just like all these different things. Like we know that CBN is good for sleep. So we have the minor cannabinoids. We know that they have their application in medicine, and in, just in practicality, but there's going to have to be a lot more research going forward on that. The other thing too is that they're minor cannabinoids. So whenever we try to isolate them and then create them in abundance, we have to process them more. So that it always involves chemicals. It's ethanol, isopropyl alcohol, butane, things like this. It always requires a lot of processing to isolate them down and then create them in abundance.
So it would take away the argument of it's natural and organic.
Right.
Because it's no longer natural and organic
That's
at that
right.
point.
So when we're looking at the plant and we think, okay, if I'm going to go and I'm going to purchase this legal cannabis and I'm going to have it in the flower form, it is going to have those minor cannabinoids in it. But what we're primarily looking at is THC and then maybe also CBD. And that's where our real medicine comes into play. And that's where we start to see, the potential for a lot of really amazing things. And when, I had people come to me for years over very serious things. When I was mostly, when I was selling CBD and mostly dealing with people on a CBD level. And, I had people coming to me that had they were going to retire in 3 months and they just got diagnosed with Parkinson's. And I had a patient I always want to call them patients, but because that's what I deal with now is medical marijuana patients. But I had a client over the years, very near and dear to me, and she bought for me for years because her mom passed away recently, but she was caring for her mom who had Alzheimer's. And so she would come to me for CBD and I helped her get set up on a very specific protocol to help her situation with her mom with Alzheimer's. And, these were people that had very desperate situations and they were looking for the best thing to do for their loved one or for themselves at that time. And I remember always saying, we need weed. What we need is the THC. But
when do we need it? We need it now.
But what I can do is I can sell you the highest quality CBD I have found in the country. And I can teach you what it is. I can teach you how to use it. And I will walk with you to create a protocol for this, like an actual dosing for this. Because that's the other kind of myth that you'll see if you start looking around. Oh, you can't dose cannabis. Yes, you can. You absolutely can. They've been doing it on the West Coast for decades. And I would walk with these people of trying to help them come up with their protocols. But I would always tell them I can get you to this ceiling, but I can't take you any further. I can teach you what THC can do for you, but I cannot sell that to you. So unfortunately, you will have to go find that on the black market until we get dispensaries. And of course, these were people that had no interest in the black market. So, I was working with people for years, trying to use CBD literally to the fullest extent that we could. And now it's been glorious. I mean, some of these people I've worked with have now passed away, but, it's been glorious now for me to help some of my older customers now get their medical marijuana cards because I'm yes, finally now we can bump you to what you really needed all along.
Yeah.
We want the THC. Just like you said, the Delta 8, the Delta 9, all this other crap they're coming up with. It's like a step backwards. It's like a Band-Aid. It's almost like a slap in the face. I feel like for people like me that have worked so hard and understand this and worked for so long, no, thank you. We don't want the shitty whatever it is they sell at the gas station. Thank you. I would just like the actual plant.
Yeah.
And Delta 8 is not going to shrink cancer tumors. So, it's recreational and it's garbage.
Fair.
That's just my opinion.
Yeah, that's fair.
So,
and your opinion is you've spent a lifetime working to craft your opinion, so it's very valuable. So before we get to how it's going to help, let's first establish the fact that in Kentucky, at least currently, we have a couple of paths forward to being able to obtain THC, right? Let me start with the federal piece because I just saw this really, I think yesterday or day before. We had already scheduled this episode, and then I got onto X and saw that allegedly the president has changed this from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. Is there any truth to that, or do you know?
So that happened several months ago.
Okay.
And that was a step forward. Now, for marijuana advocacy groups, again, like I said, there's this whole thing with the lobbyists and the advocacy groups is kind of like an all or nothing sort of thing. And a lot of people saw it as you didn't really do what we needed you to do. I saw it as a step forward. if we can take small steps forward, I have hope that we'll take bigger steps in the future. So it wasn't exactly what everybody wanted, but it was a good compromise. I'm like, well, it's the first thing they've done in almost 100 years. So that's helpful.
But Schedule 1 is saying there's no medical value to it, right? There's no use for it medically.
Right. If it stays on the schedule. Well, I'm not sure because I think actually like what pharmaceuticals are also in schedules. So,
sure.
So yeah. So no. What they basically did was they took it out. So before it was scheduled with like LSD.
Right.
And so, that was always sort of bizarre is it's like, who did that? Like, have they ever used LSD? Do they understand the fundamental differences between these things? It was crazy. So it definitely needed to be moved. So it was rescheduled with hesitancy. Trump did sign off on that. I was very disappointed in the rhetoric that he still repeated as he did that. I watched, because it was important to me, because it was historical. I did watch when he actually signed that into law, but, he still kind of parroted reefer madness. And I think part of that is his age. And he's openly said before he's never used marijuana. I'm like, you're so much fun. But, he sort of kind of parroted like, I don't really know that this is safe. We have to be really careful, yada, yada, yada. But at the end of the day, I was like, sweet, at least they've rescheduled it. That will help because one of the biggest things about rescheduling it is that it now opens it up for more research opportunities. Now, I don't think it will really change that, to be honest with you, because
it feels like the research's been done.
Well, one thing that Americans, and I think a lot of Americans started to realize this maybe during 2020, but I think there's still a lot of people that are kind of ignorant to it and definitely ignorant prior to 2020 is that when you use the word research, you're usually talking about like pharmaceutical research, like, scientific research. That is mostly funded by pharmaceutical companies. Mm-hmm. And pharmaceutical companies are not going to fund research that acts against their financial interests. And so I'm not really sure that rescheduling it will actually change a lot in regards to American research on cannabis because the pharmaceutical companies are so dominant here. They basically rule our country. Now, when you look at other countries that the pharmaceutical companies don't have such an arm of power over, you'll notice that there's research that is, very prolific. Israel is a really good country to look at cannabis research. Dr. Meshulam has done research. I think he's actually passed away now, maybe in the last couple of years, but he's done research on cannabis since like the 1960s in Israel for the hospital and the university. Has a breadth of research. You look at other countries that have been researching cannabis for decades, and that is where we get a lot of the information on the applications for cancer.
It feels to me like the rescheduling, and I don't know, it just hit me just now, so I'm totally making this up. Mm-hmm. But it feels to me like the rescheduling may not be for research reasons as opposed to banking. Reasons. And, right, because Colorado, for example, if you have a legal dispensary, marijuana is still illegal federally.
You can't put it in the bank.
You can't put any of the proceeds from your business into the bank. Mm-hmm. And at least that's my opinion. That it's a cash business.
Which is dangerous.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Right. And so to me, it feels like that's what the motivation is. It's going to allow the country then to govern the banking aspect of this.
Yeah. And I think, a couple things about that. So, when I was talking about how like California has been like a shit show program since 1996, even just a couple of years ago, I was literally some of my favorite cannabis speakers. I was watching TED Talks that they were giving specifically designed to dispensaries of what to do when law enforcement comes and steals your money. This was for California. So this was just a couple of years ago. So that's the issue. It's been a cash business since the beginning. Mm-hmm. And when you look at states like California and probably some other states, I'm sure this has happened in, it was a common known fact that all of a sudden, you live in a smaller county and sheriff's department shows up and they take all your computers and take all your cash.
Yeah.
And what do? And the trainings were based on to teach your employees how to handle that so that the situations did not escalate. And when I watched those TED Talks and listened to these, these training protocols, it basically was like, we're going to stand against the wall and we're going to make our hands clear and we're not going to stop them. And it was also teaching the dispensaries in California at that time how you needed to have, like the lady that was giving it was saying, like a 3-step fail safe. So we needed to download everything on one computer system, but needed to back up to another one, needed to back up to another one remotely, so that when they come, not if, but when they come and they steal your computers and they steal all your cash, you did not lose all of your data.
Yeah.
You still have taxes to pay.
Sure.
And they're going to want that too. And it was how to and it was what it was trying to do was minimize the amount of days the dispensary would be down. They'd have to shut down before they could reopen.
Sure.
And so this was like a prevalent problem in California. This is why there was training on it. It wasn't like, oh, this might happen to you. It's like, no, this will happen to you in certain parts of California. And you need to know what is the best way to protect the business and your employees so that it doesn't escalate with the law enforcement. So the cash issue has been an issue for decades.
Yeah, from day one.
And as it's gone through the United States, it's continued to be a cash issue. It's a cash issue with CBD. Credit card processors do not want to process your payments if they know you're selling CBD. So I think that was, in my opinion, probably what was more of Trump's motivation than anything else. I actually think he hates marijuana because he's a stick in the mud. But and he doesn't care. He's not a user. He doesn't care. I think that's the banking issue. And they're going to have to resolve the banking issue. So this was a step in the right direction to resolve the banking issue.
Yeah, certainly.
And I also think, so the second part to that is that, and I've spent some time on this recently thinking about, I think that, it's such a large business. It's like you cannot ignore the money. That's the thing, is that when states legalize and there's a state next to them, the state still under prohibition is looking at its neighbor like, how much did you just bring in the first quarter? Did you just save your entire public school system?
Yeah.
It's so much money, they can't ignore it. Even if they hate it, even if their religion or their, their old propaganda or their age or their community tells them no, when they look at the data and they look at the money, they cannot ignore the money.
I think that still adds to the stigma of it, right? To say it's such this huge thing that it's underground, for lack of a better term, and that's still a barrier to overcoming the stigma, to say, oh my gosh, this many people or whatever it is, this big of a business, almost like a double-edged sword for that topic.
And when they start looking at the money, the things that they cannot ignore is that it has literally saved school systems in states. It has saved their public school systems. And when they start to look at the millions of dollars in tax revenue on recreational, not medical, that it brings in, they cannot ignore that. And when you start to get in crisis, I mean, like Kentucky's in crisis. We're constantly in crisis in the bigger cities like Lexington and Louisville has been in crisis. Jefferson County's been in crisis for years, going bankrupt on their public school system. You cannot ignore that. Ohio was in the same situation till they legalized. You're like, well, here's a way that we can generate this revenue. So they have to start to consider it. And especially when they start to consider that their neighboring state is doing it, and they know that their citizens are driving over there to get it and paying tax dollars over there. So I think one of the reasons, and this is just my opinion, but I think that probably the reason that Trump and his crew were like, okay, let's make it Schedule 3 and let's like make a little leadway on this. I think the federal government's kind of sitting tight and trying to figure out where is their place in this, because I think they want to maximize on their top dollar. They're trying to figure out who's going to dominate this industry. Sure. And by and large, there are certain companies that dominate the industry. And that's something that people get really upset about, is that we've seen that in Kentucky. I mean, you open up a new program and suddenly you're like, wow, damn, the same company owns 90% of the dispensaries here. How'd that happen?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I'll come back to that right after this, but certainly the government wants it in there. So if a state has legalized it, but it's still illegal federally, and there's no place to put that money because you need it federally insured for the bank, then that would take away the opportunities for the government then to tax it or to see the benefit. At least that's my opinion.
Yeah. And, the bank situation has gotten better. So there are banks that will hold cannabis money, but my understanding still is that they just cannot be like FDIC insured.
Yeah.
Or FDNC insured, federal. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and and it's like, it's better now. Like I said, years ago when I was watching a lot of videos and learning a lot about this, like it was really pretty scary because, and also going into programs, like, states would open up programs, and before they would even like approve you as a dispensary, they would want to know what your plan is. Like, what does your safe look like? Where are you going to store your cash off site? How are you going to get the cash there? What kind of security do you have for that cash? Because as you can think as a law enforcement agent, it was creating like this bomb of a problem to open a business where the line's all the way down the street and you got piles of cash sitting in there. Like it was almost creating a threat to the communities in which were around those dispensaries by having such large amounts of cash. So a lot of states, when they would open their programs out west, we're talking years ago, there was very specific guidelines and questions over how are you going to handle the cash?
Enter the Tulsa King.
Cash. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, just to speak to your big business piece of that, our little company, I said, you know what? I think I'm going to apply to be a dispensary. Because the sales pitch, the propaganda that came out was, you too. Yeah, anybody could do this. You too.
As long as you have millions of dollars to throw in the garbage can.
The common man can open a dispensary and do your thing. And I thought,
I could have told you that.
I don't have a lot of money, but I see where the future is going, and I wouldn't mind doing that. Now, I downloaded the specifics and thought I can't get there fast enough, and I just don't have the resources to get there fast enough.
There's never one man that owns a dispensary. There's usually a whole group of them.
And to the point, Kentucky's local man didn't win the contracts for Kentucky. You may or may not want to touch on that, but and some other friends that we speak to is like, nope, that's not what happened at all. So I would have lost because it was a non-refundable deposit.
Oh, yeah.
Just to put your name in the hat.
And they want to see what assets you have. You have to have money to back it, not credit, assets.
Yeah. Well, we couldn't compete. Once we read the fine print, we was like, there's no chance for me to do that. But to the point, I would have lost the money anyway because nobody local ended up with those contracts, if I understand right.
Yeah. So I hope that it will be different for Kentucky in the future. So again, it's like, it's this weird thing because when you look at the United States and you look at the different programs, when a state comes out with a medical program, and they always start medical first, when they come out with a medical program, every state looks different. Like, you can never really find two states and go, they're identical. There's some variance from state to state. And again, it has to do with the legislation and then also the culture of the state that it's happening in. And I hope that for Kentucky, I knew it was going to be this way. People were really surprised, when finally, like, whoever won the applications came out, people were like, oh, this is bullshit. It's the same people, and I'm like, oh, well, of course it is. But but for me, I'm like, but we have our dispensaries. They are coming. And here's the other thing too, is that from my perspective, I'm trying to get product in the hands of the people that need it the quickest.
Right.
They need it now. There's people who have already died waiting on it. So I need it now, not 2 years from now. People who have cancer don't need it 2 years from now. They need it right now. And so, people say, well, you're just sort of like selling for less. No, I would say that we're making logistical moves forward. Mm-hmm. It makes more sense for companies that are already established and have dispensaries in other states to come in because guess what? They're up and running. They've done this before. They know the drill. Law might be a little bit different, but it ain't that much different.
Right.
They've already done it in other states. They have the infrastructure. They have the money.
Sure.
They know what to do. They have the software. They have the training. They're ready to roll. That's why we have a dispensary in Lexington.
Yeah.
If it had been someone local, we probably wouldn't have a dispensary in Lexington yet. They would still be trying to figure it out. So I knew that going into it, we really did need those bigger companies to kind of come in and start it. But I feel like as Kentuckians, we have such a certain type of culture here. And again, let's go back to what we talked about earlier. We love this plant. We have a history with this plant. This is not new to us.
Right.
Dark Horse isn't bringing this to us. Dark Horse didn't bring cannabis to Kentucky. It's always been here long before me and you, David.
Right.
They brought us a dispensary. They brought us dispensaries. But I feel like because of our history with the plant and because of the kind of culture that we live in, and if people continue to push, like look what's happened with bourbon. When bourbon first came in, it was the big players, right? Like in the last, couple decades when bourbon's like had this big reemergence. it was the big players first. But now you see these little small companies popping up, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to think of it.
I feel like it's going to be the same. I think that if people will stick with it and they actually feel passionate about it, that we will start to see like craft marijuana. And really, it would probably be better.
Craft marijuana, yeah.
Like craft beer, right?
Yeah, right.
Craft
Took me a second. I'm sorry to say that.
Think about that. Yeah. I think that it would probably be once we get a recreational program is when we will really see more of like the smaller players come in.
Yeah.
And we'll see more of like maybe that market for like the craft. But right now, I'm not mad that people can go buy their stuff legally. You know, like
well, they
if
have
it
the
takes
opportunity.
the big guys, like let them come in. They're struggling. You know, our program is struggling some, but it's, you know, there's some things to consider. With
sure.
That,
so to your point, so Kentucky, last year, 2 years ago, passed legislation. We're a medicinal state. Am I saying that correctly?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's not recreational yet, but it allowed the big players, the dispensaries, to at least start establishing a presence. Now, it seemed to me like it took a really long time to get the dispensaries open, but they're starting to open.
Yes. So it really didn't. You know, it's funny. I don't know. I don't know if this happens in every state when a program comes in, but you know, because of my my background with the plan, and I would always try to keep up with like what was going on in other states in the hopes that we would one day see that. I really didn't think we would, to be honest with you. But you know, I would try to keep up with kind of like what was going on in other states and seeing like what other states did. The thing is that Kentuckians, like, they expected the law to change, and then like the next day we would have somewhere to go buy weed. And it was like, no, this is not how this works. I think that people really did not understand the bigger picture of how it works. January 1st, 2025 was when applications could be submitted. So that was technically when the law took effect. So no one could even submit an application until then. Now, January 1st, 2025, because the law took effect, patients could start to apply for their cards. So, you know, dispensaries could not suddenly be up and going because they didn't even know yet if they had been awarded the license. The other thing too is states are always like this. It's like a tiered thing. So, you know, you have multiple levels of license. So you have the dispensary, they license for that, but you have the cultivators who are growing it. They license for that. You have the processors. They license for that. You have the safety compliance. You know, there's different levels of that. And so even if a dispensary, in theory, which they never could have opened February 1st, they have nothing to sell. The cultivators aren't up and running.
I guess I just thought, like I think many others would say, the government's already got it figured out. It's just
because the government doesn't run it. The government legislates it. The government is who lays out the rules, but the weed is not coming from the government. In Canada, it does, but not in America. So it's privately owned. It's just that the laws that are governing it. So, you know,
so it takes some time.
And even though I really dislike Andy Brashear, I do feel like he has taken like a lot of flack on this, but it's like, it's really doesn't have a whole lot to do with him, except that he did misappropriate some of the cannabis money, but that's for another podcast. And I'm kind of pissed off about, but anyway, so, you know, what happened was January 1st, you know, we had the applications come in, then through the lottery process, and, you know, there's people that have accused the governor of hand selecting the lottery. I don't know. I have no opinion on that because I don't know. But, you know, you get okay, here you go. You got your license. So once the cultivators were informed that they received the license, that's when their plants could go in the ground.
Oh, okay.
So even if a dispensary had already rented a building, had their plan together, ready to roll, it doesn't matter. They have no product. So, you know, there's a time period in which the plant has to be grown. I mean, you know, like we live in this time period now where people like expect to like push a button. It's like, it don't work like that. Right. So we have to grow the plant. It has a time period in which it needs to grow, even if it's grown indoors artificially. So, you know, there had to be time for the cultivators. And people also really underestimate the amount of money that goes into this. So, you know, to to open a dispensary, to be a cultivator, we're talking multi-million-dollar businesses here.
Yeah.
We're not talking about small potatoes. We're talking about very big operations. And big operations that really have to know what they're doing. Because when the safety compliance comes in, if you go and there's something wrong, the government says nope, and that product is junk. So there's a lot on the line for these companies.
Are you saying that for Kentucky's dispensaries, it's Kentucky dope? Like they had
Yes, it has to be grown here. And that is standard. So there's a lot of people online that I've been seeing. They're like, Kentucky screwed their program up. No, they did not. So all states do that. All states do that. You might be able to get online and find one that doesn't. If you don't, please let me know, because I've never heard of a single state that doesn't.
I had no idea. So that's why it takes so long. It
always has to be grown within the state that it's being sold in. And in my opinion, that is the right way to do it. We want to keep it home based. I don't want to go to the dispensary and buy weed that was grown in Canada or California.
And that's what I thought it was.
No.
That's hence the being able to be open February 1st is because there's a supply channel from a national player.
Now, keep in mind that they had to bring seeds in, because there's this whole issue, and I don't even want to go off on that squirrel tangent, because this has been an issue across the whole country, is that once a state goes legal, it's like, well, you could only use legal seeds. Well, where do the legal seeds come from? Because they can't come from a state that just came out of prohibition because they're illegal. You know what I mean? Right. It's this weird thing. But yes, programs always want it to stay in-house. So yes. And people have been really, really critical of Kentucky's program. And honestly, I have been hands-on with the program since it started. I was in the first round of patients because I'm a patient myself. I was one of the first to receive my medical marijuana card, and got it, I think, the end of January 2025. It was January 27th. I was sending everybody my family pictures, here's my card. And when I went through the process, I was actually very surprised and happy with the way the program was set up. Is it perfect? No. Did Kentucky do a bad job? No, I don't really think so. There's some things that we need change with the program, but people just don't want to see the bigger picture. It's it's a brand new program. It's like this with every state. They start out with something, they will fix it, they will expand it, it will keep moving over the years, especially if they get feedback from the patients. But overall, and I was kind of always hoped this, I used to joke around with this with my husband and stuff, maybe if we are one of the last to come out of prohibition, we'll do it right, because we'll look at what all these other states have done and fix it. I don't know that we fixed it, but I don't think that our program is terrible.
Well, that explains the delay. I hadn't heard that.
Yes.
And I'm not super familiar with it anyway.
And that's every state. So
yeah.
It's nothing new. People think, Kentucky messed it up. No.
And so that's why the number of dispensaries is very limited at this point, because whoever is owning them and supplying them is required to grow it here locally.
Well, and the other thing too, you have to think about these companies that applied, they had to wait until they knew they got the license, because like you said, you looked into it.
Right.
It's a large non-refundable amount of money up front.
Right.
And chances are you won't get it. You probably get struck by lightning before you get that lottery, right?
Right.
So are you going to go rent something ahead of time? Are you going to go buy a building ahead of time? Are you going to go hire staff ahead of time? No. You're going to have to wait until you know that you got the license. And then once you know you have the license, then you can start to go rent your space, buy your space, man it out, get it ready, hire your employees. But then you can do all that. But if the cultivators are not ready, what are you going to do now? Right now we have 9 cultivators in Kentucky. That's as of April the 6th. That's pretty high. We only had a few months ago. So we're getting there. It's going to take some time. It was really kind of shocking to me that people thought that it was going to be an overnight deal.
Well, I certainly did. I just thought if you want to go buy a large screen TV, there's a supply at 25 different stores for large screen TVs. Right. The supply channel exists.
All right.
Right. And you just open up a new place to buy a TV. Yeah. Well, I thought the same thing for cannabis.
Yeah, because they cannot bring it from out of state, which would have been easier. And, I do, and there was a lot of people in the cannabis advocacy groups they were like, why won't the governor make an allocation saying that, for a certain time period, plants can be brought in from out of the state, because we need our patients to get this. And I do understand their concern around that because, again, like I said, it's one thing for us to sit here and talk about like, I want to smoke weed just to relax. Or, like even for me, like, I want to use cannabis to help with my arthritis and my endometriosis and my other health problems. It's completely different if you have cancer. So when you are talking about people who are trying to use the plant to save their life, there is a really strong sense of urgency. And so the advocacy groups that work around that, I totally get where they're coming from. And there was a lot of like, pressing of like, can the governor not do something to say, let's bring in plants from out of state temporarily? But I think what a lot of people, it's like that big picture they don't want to look at. The governor doesn't decide that.
Yeah.
He doesn't get to decide that. The legislators decided what the program looked like. Everything has to happen within the bounds of that program of what the law says. The law says the plants have to be here. It's just the way it is. Like we'll get there, and we're there. We've got it. I mean, they've got tons of strains in Lexington, so we're there.
Yeah, I'm getting ready to ask you about the strains right here in just a second. 'Cause I want to get into what that looks like. But that seems like that's also a path for our local farmers to maybe get back on board by legislating the concept that the plant has to be a Kentucky plant.
Yes.
Then that would at least give Kentucky farmers maybe some hope that they can grow this crop at some point.
Yeah. So like when we were, mostly looking at hemp for Kentucky farmers, that was being done in outside growing. And, one of the things that was explained to me early on was that this was such a great pathway for Kentucky because, like I said earlier, we got farmers, they have barns, they have the equipment, we have the infrastructure, like they already had the infrastructure. And then the climate allows for that in our summer. Okay. So like plants can go in the ground here in Kentucky into May, 1st of June. They're ready to be harvested by September. Awesome. That's one harvest. Now, for hemp and CBD, that was doable. But when we start looking at larger programs, we start looking at like the medical program, we start looking at potentially recreational in the future, there would be a much larger demand. So indoor growing would have to become a thing. I don't feel comfortable speaking on the agricultural aspect of could Kentucky farmers handle the indoor growing.
Well, that's a business case that they're going to make. Yeah. But at least they have the opportunity to make the case.
Yes. But they could definitely do summer growing. But you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And that's the thing is that like some states, it's not even an option to grow it outdoors. It's all grown indoors. So, I think that like when we were talking about like the history of Kentucky and like, Kentucky always has this big illegal growing. We have the climate here and like, I'm sure it has to do with like our soil and our other conditions, but Kentucky has a really good scenario for outdoor growing. For a lot of states, that's not even an option. So it's all indoor growing. But, I definitely think that there's pathways for farmers.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's their business case to make, right? If I want to build a building to grow it, then they're going to make those decisions. Yeah.
You're going to have to come talk to me first.
Yeah, that's right.
Because their daddies told them that only people who are lazy.
So we've talked about there are some dispensaries open now.
Yes.
We have one in Lexington. That's all I know is just the one. Can anybody go to a dispensary?
So there's 8 dispensaries statewide right now that are open. A good portion of them are owned by Dark Horse and are Speakeasy, which is the one in Hamburg. And I really like the Speakeasy in Hamburg. I'm going to be completely honest with you. It's the nicest dispensary I've ever been in.
Nice.
Yeah. And I went to like 3 or 4 when I was in Vegas back in 2019. And there were some nice ones in Vegas, but the one in Hamburg is very nice. I haven't been to their other ones. It's very welcoming. It's very posh. you go in and like the first room, it's like you're in a fancy hotel. All of the employees are extremely helpful, extremely friendly. The manager is also very sweet, very friendly. He has lots of experience. It's a nice experience. I have been very pleased to take my clients there. A lot of my clients want me to go with them on their first trip.
Sure.
And it's funny and it's cute. I'll get them all the way to the card and they have their card and they're so empowered, like they're so ready. And then they'll call me and be like, I got my card, but will you please just meet me over there like the first time? Like it's funny to me how scared people still are to just go in the building. I think some of them are afraid of getting arrested. I think they're intimidated and overwhelmed. They don't really know. Most of them don't really know what they're going to buy. Most of the clients that I deal with in the past year have never smoked weed a single time in their life.
That's right.
So they're not even really sure what they're going in to purchase. And I like the speakeasy experience. It's, taking my older clients, especially in there. I'm glad that it is beautiful. It is clean. There's like pictures, photographs and paintings of horses, and the staff is so helpful. I love it. Your question about can anybody go in there? The answer is no. So you do need to be an active card holder to go in there. Or you can be a caretaker, which is still also, an active card holder if you're a caretaker.
So we have a friend that works at the speakeasy, and I was trying to get him on the show, and maybe we still will. Uh-huh. And so as we talked earlier about how I've researched some of the hemp-based products, he has spent a lot of time answering some really basic questions for me. So that's great to hear that. And then as we talk about the stigma, what a great strategy then to make this a posh experience as you come in, because you start to remove those barriers to say this isn't whatever you want to assign to it. And
I do understand that in some regard it's temporary. If Kentucky was to decide to enact recreational legislation, that would change overnight.
Sure.
But I'm very happy. And one thing about in other states, like I said, they always start out medical. Eventually they go recreational because they cannot ignore the money. They do still try to kind of honor their medical patients by having like a separate line for them or separate options for them, where they don't have to stand in line for so long but right now I feel like it's such a great thing to let people who need it for medical purposes come in and see that this is what it's like. And I was really glad that it went into Hamburg. I couldn't think of a better place in Lexington, honestly.
Well, it's the most accessible place in the state, really. Yeah.
And I mean, it's a nice spot. It's beautiful. It's a clean area. It doesn't feel sketchy. I mean, before the dispensary in Hamburg opened, I was telling my clients to go to Ohio. That was at the direction of the director of the cannabis program for the state of Kentucky, which is what I was doing as a patient, until the dispensary opened here. And the dispensaries in Ohio, I would give people a heads up, like, you're going to go and you're going to wait in line for an hour. Just be prepared. You're going to stand in line for an hour. And most of them were in very seedy parts of town where, you weren't really sure if you felt comfortable parking there. And not everybody is concerned about that. But when I start looking at like my clients and, they're 60, 70, 80 years old, like, they don't want to drive to Cincinnati and, park in a, questionable parking lot and go stand in line for an hour and a half.
I would say this to you. If we were to ever get our card, you would be the first call I would make to say, will you go with me?
Yeah, that will definitely go with
me. We took a vacation to a place where it's legal recreationally. And we said, hey, let's stop at a dispensary because we've never experienced that before. And I don't know what to expect. And in this location, it was, I just call it, a little shopping center. Every little town has 1,000 of these little shopping centers. But to the point of someone that is not familiar with this, we walked in, and of course they take your name, It's a different experience to walk in to say you can't even shop until you sign, who are you and what are you doing? I thought, I just want to look around.
Yeah.
Not to mention when we got to the actual store part of it, that there were, I was going to say 1,000. There's not 1,000 strains to look at, but there was a lot.
A lot of choices, yeah.
And if to know me is to understand, if I go buy a pack of T-shirts, white shirts under a dress shirt, I can stand in Walmart for an hour and compare packs, right? So for me, somebody like me to walk in there, it was just this overwhelming experience. And I was just shopping. I was just looking around because it's interesting.
Yeah.
So certainly, if we were ever to get our card, you would be the first phone call to say, let's go.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, and what I've been telling my clients is that they're very, very sweet and helpful in the dispensary. At this point, they know me by name. Every time I go in there, they're like, Miss Davis, you're back. And I'm like, yes, and I have more people. But like I said, there's certain things that they are not allowed to talk about. There's also, the job of the bud tender, that's what they call them, like not a bartender, but a bud tender. The job of the bud tender is to just help you make your purchase. And so, from that position, there's kind of like, there's 3 or 4 options here. And, they can sort of give you some guidance like, do you want to feel tired, or do you want to sleep well? Do you want to feel creative? But like with the medical program, I have people contacting me that have very specific questions. Things that are life-changing, like my child qualifies for medical marijuana, but I'm afraid to give it to them. I have cancer, but I did chemo, and it sent me into cardiac arrest. And now I can't do chemo. So if those people go into the dispensary and like, this is my situation, I don't know what to do. The bud tenders can go, well, I have indica, sativa, and hybrid. Which one would you like? This one will make you creative, and this one will make you sleep good.
Yeah.
Now for me, I'm not a doctor and I'm not a nurse, and I cannot tell these clients, medical information or give them medical advice. But what I can do is I can gather for them resources and protocols that others have used on an educational. It's what I always tell people over and over. Now, you must remember that the information I'm giving you is on educational purposes only. You take it and you do with it what you will. But what I can help them to do is gather information of what others have done to develop a plan for themselves, and then go to the dispensary with them to help them choose specific strains that may be beneficial for the specific things that they are trying to remedy. Whereas if a person goes into the dispensary and says, I have this specific condition, tell me which strain will work the best, they cannot do that for them. They cannot do that for them. Now, they can say, hey, this one right here has this, and I've heard it's good for inflammation. Maybe you should try that one. I've had a lot of people say that it helps their inflammation. But they're very limited on that. So that's kind of where I come in, is like trying to walk beside people. Again, not giving them medical advice, not telling them what to do, but helping them gather resources and helping them to sort of design their own protocol to kind of like increase the chances that they will receive the outcome that they want to. And then also, like I said, kind of like coaching them and like, it's okay.
Right.
It's okay if you use marijuana.
Right.
I promise you're not lazy. And you might like jazz music.
And you might like jazz music.
And jazz music's awesome. So there you go. And I will go with you and hold your hand the first time. But after that, you're good. And I like to make sure they get like signed up for all the discounts, because the dispensary offers all kinds of discounts. I had to listen and like read this crap online as soon as the dispensary opened about how expensive the prices were. It's bullshit. The prices are not expensive. I tell people it's like, so they sent out an email the other day, and like right now they've got most of their eighths down to $50 an eighth. Okay. Well, maybe you can get an eighth for less than $50 on the black market. Good for you. But I have a feeling that you and I like different types of product.
Right.
Because I can also go down here to the liquor store and buy like a bottle of Heaven Hill bourbon or I could buy Woodford Reserve.
Right.
You know, so it's totally fine if you think that it should be really cheap, but it's kind of like you get what you pay for. And when you start comparing apples to apples, I've kind of felt like since the dispensary opened until recently when they dropped their prices, maybe they were about $10 more an eighth in the black market. I'll pay you an extra $10 to be a legal beagle.
It seems like
know
that's
exactly what I'm getting.
The real value of the dispensaries is that you can come in and custom choose what is best for you as opposed to whatever's grown in Jimmy's backyard. And I don't know what's grown in Jimmy's backyard. I don't know if Jimmy knows, but that seems to be the real value of this process is that you can walk in and
you know exactly what you're getting. It has, you know, the date that it was harvested, the date that it was tested, what the terpenes are in it, what the percentages of the terpenes, how much THC is in it, how much CBD is in it. It tells you all of that information. And then the other glorious part is that I buy it and they staple it and I'll walk out the door and I'm not going to go to jail.
yeah. Yeah.
And I can have my kids in the car with it and I'm going to drive home with it just like if I went to the pharmacy, and it does not have to be a thought in my head of what if I get pulled over.
Yeah.
No thought.
Yeah. That's super
It's
valuable.
worth $10 for that alone.
That's right.
In my world. Now, I don't know about everybody else. In my world, I will pay the $10.
That peace of mind is worth it.
Pay the $10, yes.
So you spoke a little bit towards why it's just now coming into play, right? Why the dispensaries are starting to get inventory there.
Yes.
So one of the things that I've been looking at is, you know, not everybody likes to smoke.
No.
And so, but if I understand this correctly, the other products, like let's just say a gummy, aren't really available to us yet. Or are they?
They are. So, okay. So the one thing is that Kentucky does not allow for smoking. So, Kentucky law says that you cannot smoke medical marijuana. It has to be vaporized, ingested, or applied topically. That is pretty common. So not all states will include that in their bills, but Kentucky did. It's generally considered that smoking is unhealthy. So, you know, whether we're talking about cigarettes, weed, cigars, whatever, right? We all know it's not healthy. So the biggest thing about the risk of smoking is the combustion that occurs. So like when you have a cigarette, you light it, you have a cigar, you light it, a bowl, whatever, you light it, the flame comes to it. And when it ignites and the flame, you know, is there, it creates carcinogens that can then get released, and you are then sucking that in and inhaling that through the combustion. So if we vaporize it, combustion never occurs. So, you know, it's like, it's hard for me to ever tell clients like vaporizing is completely healthy, because I can't say that with 100% certainty. Because, you know, there's sort of like the scientific and medical argument, like anything that's going into the lungs could potentially not be healthy.
Right.
Of course, breathing the air could probably not be healthy too. But, we do know that vaporizing is safer for the lungs than smoking, because combustion never occurs during vaporizing. So when you vaporize, it's basically that we are heating the plant material to the proper temperature to then release what we need to then inhale. As we exhale it, it's basically just coming out as vapor, as no smoke. So that's what Kentucky wrote into the bill. People were very confused about this. So like before the program even started, I was seeing all this crap online. People were like, they're not even going to have flour. And I'm like, yes, they are. That's all they're going to have. Like, stop spreading lies. So, up until like maybe a month or two ago, all we had was flour. Now the gummies are available. I was in the dispensary in Hamburg like a week or two ago. The bud tender told me they're going to have RSO oil coming soon. We can talk about RSO oil if you want to here in a minute. RSO oil is very specific, mostly to cancer patients. But, so, you know, they don't have, I haven't seen any topicals in there yet. So they mostly just had the flour. But the biggest thing I like to tell people is that all we want is flour. That's it. We just want the flour. So, you know, they can sell tinctures. They'll be able to sell tinctures. That's coming very soon. They have the gummies already. They'll have the RSO oil. They'll probably start to have like some salves, some roll-ons, some creams, some stuff like that. But for my clients, I always am just trying to convey to them, like, we just want the flour. Like, if you want to buy those other things as a convenience, go right ahead. But if we're talking about like cancer patients, if we're talking about people with very serious problems, I'd never recommend that they buy those products. I recommend they buy the flower and they use the flower to make what they need with the flower. Because again, whenever we start to make our gummies, our tinctures, our RSO oil that's mass produced, it is done through chemical processes to process that down. So you're not getting natural and plant medicine. You've got that, but there's a lot added to it. And I just don't feel comfortable telling people who are already sick to add other chemicals into their regimen that they don't exactly know what could affect them, how it will affect them. So for me, if it was a family member as myself, I want the flower, and I will take that flower and turn it into RSO oil for myself. I will take that flower, make my own edibles. I will take that flower, make my own tincture. I don't need a big company to do that inside of a factory where it's being mixed with all these other chemicals that then I'm definitely going to consume, because, they'll extract out the chemicals that are what the FDA considers safe, but they're still present.
Right.
So if we want to really use what I feel like is the best, which is like the natural whole plant medicine, we want the flower that has not been tampered with. There's not been pesticides put on that. There has not been herbicides put on that. They probably taught you otherwise in law, but you don't have to put those things on cannabis. Pests hate cannabis. The terpenes are so strong. That's the smell. They don't want to touch it. So, you don't ever really have to treat cannabis much. So, if we just can go buy the flower, that's about the most natural thing that we can get. We can take that at home and we can make those products for ourselves to consume. Yeah. But under the law, we cannot smoke it. So,
interesting.
It must be vaporized. Now, that's part of what I teach people. That's why I brought this to show you today. So whenever I start talking about vaporizing with people, especially my demographic, they get really nervous because what they think about is what they see everybody walking around with in their mouth, which are usually oil-based vaporizers. So when you see someone walking around huffing on a vaporizer, you think of like an e-cigarette kind of deal.
Right.
Most of the time, there are oil cartridges in that. There's people, all the time. I get offered this stuff all the time because they know what I do. So people love to offer me weed, and 9.5 times out of 10, I decline. But anyway,
so you say there's a chance.
There's a chance, but it's pretty small, especially if they start telling me where it came from. So, people will go to like Ohio, Michigan, other places. They'll come back with these oil cartridges that they put into vaporizers. So then that's what they're huffing on most of the time when you see them out. I don't use oil cartridges. I never have. I've been offered those for years. I've had access to those off and on when visiting other states. I would never. The oil cartridges, again, you're talking about very highly processed by the time it gets to the oil. And if you've ever tried one, you would know. I mean, it'll blow your head off. I would never tell my clients to use that, especially someone sick. So the type of vaporizing that Kentucky wants us to do, and I teach my customers, and I cannot get this brand new package open, David.
I thought maybe you could jab it through it.
No, there should be like a way to. This is a brand new one I was going to show you. We're going to get it open here in a second. But anyways, it must be childproof.
There you go.
So there's a completely big difference between the oil cartridges and dry herb vaporization. So this is what it looks like on the inside. So when you are vaporizing dry herbs, which is the plant material, which is the flower of the cannabis plant, and people get confused by that. When I tell you it's the flower of the cannabis plant, it's the weed. It's just weed. Whatever you've seen or thought before, oh, that's marijuana. That's what I'm talking about. It goes right inside this chamber.
Yeah.
It goes inside this chamber. The lid goes back on. The device heats it up. You set the temperature for the device. And all this little device does is just heat the plant material to the proper temperature that will convert the cannabinoids, because THC has to be activated. So if I was to just take some plant material and eat it, like if I brought some and I'm like, oh, watch this, David, I'm going to eat it. It will do nothing I will not be high. I could sit here and eat an entire bag of weed and walk out of here and zero. I will be zero as far as like a head high, okay, or a body high. It has to be heated up and decarboxylated. So in order for us to receive the psychoactive effects and most of the medicinal purpose, not all, but most, we have to heat it and let it decarboxylate. It will convert the cannabinoids. So in order for us to do that, we're going to put it in here. We're going to heat it up to a certain temperature. It's going to tell us it's up at temperature. We start puffing on it. It's going to come out as vapor, sort of looks like smoke. But it's not smoke. It's vapor. There's no combustion that takes place. This is what I recommend to all my clients. This is the one I brought to show you today. I've used this exact brand for about 10 years, I think now. It's the only one I found that actually works. And they have a really good price point too. But you end up using a smaller amount. It's very discreet. And there's almost no smell. And the other thing too is that, again, no combustion occurs. So overall, this is the healthier way for the inhalation delivery method. And a lot of people, especially in my demographic, you know, they don't want to, they don't want to smoke. You know, they say, oh gosh, I don't know. I'm going to have to smoke it. I'll have to roll joints. And I'm like, well, first of all, Kentucky says you can't do that. But second of all, I'm going to teach you how to vaporize. Oh, I don't want to do that because they're thinking of like a cigarette. They're thinking of old. And I have to teach them. I mean, I have to FaceTime people. You know, the events I have coming up are going to do demonstrations on this live, not with marijuana. We'll use other herbs so that we stay in compliance. But we're going to teach people how to do that. I have to show them how to do this and they're mind blown because they're like, oh, I didn't realize this existed. I'm only thinking of what my kid uses or my neighbor, you know. But it's a really good way to consume. And the one thing I tell people is that I know that a lot of patients don't want to use the inhalation delivery method, but it is the most effective.
Sure. So
it is the most effective method that's been tried and true forever. We know that it's fact. The other thing too is that it depends on what we're trying to do. It depends on the application. In certain applications, we don't really have to worry about inhalation. But in certain, you know, specific applications, inhalation is what we need to go with. You know, if a person is using it for seizures, we need it to work quick.
Sure.
If you eat it, you're talking 1.5 to 2 hours. Maybe an hour if you have fast moving bowels. So can a person that has a seizure disorder wait an hour?
Right.
No, they cannot.
Right.
So we need something that's going to take effect within minutes. So inhalation, anxiety, which anxiety is not on our qualified list, but you know, there are certain applications. Now, if it's a cancer patient, I would actually recommend do a couple of different delivery methods. For a cancer patient, if they were interested in doing like the RSO protocol, we would be ingesting it through the mouth on a very specific protocol over a period of time. But then I would also recommend the vape. The vape is going to work for if that cancer patient is also doing chemo or radiation and they feel sick, like nauseated, or they're having sleep issues, nausea, appetite issues. We want the vape.
Now, do you sell this pen? Is this part of your business or?
I do not.
Yeah.
So, you know, Kentucky decided to institute a new law as of January 1st, 2026. And they used very broad sweeping language when they did that. So, the government is trying to control the sale of the other vapes, of the oil cartridge vapes. You know, you have these Juul and these other products that came over the last few years that are like nicotine vapes. And then you've got these gas stations selling these Delta 8 vapes. They're the oil-based cartridges. They are getting in the hands of teenagers. So Kentucky, along with many other states, are having this very sweeping legislation to try to prohibit that, to keep them out of the hands of minors, which I totally support and understand. But unfortunately, Kentucky used very broad language when they enacted our law that took effect January 1st of this year, which said that any device, even though, as you see, this one is brand new, it's empty. There is no
Right.
oil cartridge. This is nothing but a heater. This is like a little baby oven. That's all it is. But under Kentucky state law, no. You have to apply through the ATF and ABC, and you have to pay $500 a year in a licensing fee. They have to approve you. They've only approved 10 companies. This one is not on there. I don't know why, because this is a great company. It's been around for a long time. It's a very convoluted issue. However, for my clients, I can send them a link that they can order that themselves, because they can still have it. They can order it online and have it shipped in from out of state. Because unfortunately, if you go to the dispensary and you buy a vape, it's going to cost you about $200 more.
$200 more.
Yeah, than this one. And I don't know if what they're selling works, because like I said, I went through several brands before I found this one, and this brand is the only one that I found that's actually works. Like, you can literally buy these little handheld vaporizers like this, these dryer vapes, and you use them and there's nothing. Like, they don't even work. Like, you're like, I feel nothing. So this is why I'm always really specific about what, like, I'll recommend to people. I will only recommend to people what I know 100% for sure.
Any issues with me describing that?
No, go right ahead.
So it's what we're talking about is the
and we can post a link too for the show.
As my follow-up, if we can post a link, it's the G pen, and this one is the -2 is the model of it. So I'm assuming they have just different iterations of the product as they continue.
Yeah, this is their second generation of their original model. It's great. They dropped the price $50 when they did that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is the G pen that Jennifer's familiar with and talking about the best product out there. And so we can put a link in our show notes for that too?
Yes, we can.
Okay, definitely. We'll have that there.
And I would love to sell these to my clients if the law would change.
Yeah, certainly.
But I can still hook them up with this. So
yeah, you can still get them in the right direction.
absolutely. I can get them in the right place, because I would never recommend something that I don't know about.
That's right. So let's talk about the process. We've talked a lot about what it is and where Kentucky is and what the products look like and all these other things. But how do we get there? How does a prospective client, patient, whatever, get there?
So, I printed this off for you. People, first of all, need to make sure that they are going through a registered doctor. So this was kind of an issue when it first came about, when our program first opened, and I was really worried about it. And it ended up being true about a year later. And this is where I come in. I'm like, I will literally work for old people for free. Just do not get scammed. I was so worried about this when our program first opened, and then it definitely happened. So we had these like fly-by-night companies come into Lexington. Get your medical marijuana card here. And people went and got their cards there. And guess what? Those doctors were not registered with the state. So in the initial phase of the program, the cards got approved. And then here, like November, December, there was like this mass sweep of emails that went out from the cannabis program, the state cannabis program, that was like, yeah, we've got a bunch of people who are about to deactivate their cards. And basically what happened was there was doctors who had certified people and they weren't registered with the state. There was doctors who were registered with the state, but they didn't do in-person visits, and that was required. They could not do them telehealth. Like, it was just kind of a shit show. And it was really upsetting to me because I contract with a couple of doctors or a couple of practitioners, and that was who made me aware that the state was sending out these emails. And luckily, the ones that I work for, I would never send people to them if I didn't know, but they were fine. But they were letting me know this was going on. And they were telling me they had some people come to them, like, people like in their 70s that are like, I got my card, I paid all this money, and now I'm learning that my card's getting deactivated. And it's literally just companies coming in and taking advantage of older people that are on fixed incomes. It just like boils my blood. So the biggest thing that we want to do is that if you want to try to be a card holder in the state of Kentucky, the first thing is that you need to make sure you're a resident of Kentucky. You cannot be a visitor. You have to hold residency here. You want to make sure that you are meeting with an authorized, registered practitioner. The best way to do that is one of two ways. First of all, call me. Second of all, I'm just kidding. Second of all is that you can get on the state website. If you get on the state cannabis program website, it will have a list of the practitioners who are registered. If there is a practitioner or your regular doctor is like, oh, I can write you a prescription for that, they don't know what they're talking about. You need to make sure that it's a practitioner that is listed under the state program. So once you find a practitioner that's listed over the state program, you can schedule a visit with them. That's where you're going to go in person. If that doctor tells you they can do it over telehealth, they don't know what they're doing. So that first appointment, now sometimes what the practitioners will do is, I should back up. Sometimes a practitioner will do a telehealth with you the first visit and then the in-person the second, because what they're trying to do is sort of like make sure you qualify before we do the in-person. But you must meet in person with the practitioner before you receive your final certification. So if a doctor is telling you don't have to do that, you need to check the list. Okay. So that's establishing that bona fide relationship. When you go in to meet with the doctor, you need to have your medical records printed. That's where, again, I can come into play with helping people. I kind of give some people some guidance. Mostly when people contact me, they tell me what they've got going on. I tell them whether or not it's on the qualifying list. And then I tell them what they need to take with them to their appointment. Now, Kentucky had a very short qualifying list. They left off rheumatoid arthritis.
Of course.
I mean, come on now. Like literally the Chinese, right? When I tell you 4,000 years, but whatever. Every state that has a medical program has arthritis on their list, but Kentucky left it off. It's fine. Whatever. But what Kentucky did for us is they left chronic pain on our list. And that has been our saving grace. So that's why I say when like people dog our program, I'm like, it's not that bad. So we have chronic and debilitating pain as a condition on our list. So for example, when I was certified as a medical marijuana patient, I actually qualified under 2 different conditions. I have rheumatoid arthritis and I also have endometriosis. Now, even though neither one of those conditions are specifically mentioned in the list of qualifying conditions, any practitioner in the medical field knows that endometriosis and rheumatoid arthritis are known chronic pain issues. So therefore, I qualify as a chronic pain patient. Does that make sense?
It does.
So chronic pain, it has literally been our saving grace. So a lot of patients are getting qualified under that. Now, there is a list of other things. Any form of cancer, regardless of the stage, will automatically qualify you. Epilepsy, any of those kinds of seizure activities, multiple sclerosis, muscle spasms, spasticity, chronic nausea. There's post-traumatic stress disorder, which is interesting to me that they put that on there. I don't actually think I want to speak too much to that, but that is on there as well. So we go to a doctor who's registered with the state of Kentucky to write the recommendations. The doctor goes in, they will review your medical records. You'll need to take copies of that. It's not necessary that you take the whole breadth of your medical history. You just need to take what has your name, your date of birth, the doctor who diagnosed you with that condition, or it doesn't necessarily have to be a formal diagnosis. It can just be a history of showing that you have visited the doctor for these same conditions over and over. They've been documented in your medical history, but we need to know which doctor, which practice they were with. A lot of times we can get that off my chart.
Right.
So the practitioner that you see will need copies of that for their records in case they're audited. You take that to them. They'll have a few questions for you, and then they will either certify you or not. Once they certify you, then you'll create the portal online with the state of Kentucky. The doctor's already done their part. It'll find you based on your social security number because the doctor would have already put that in. You go in, you answer a series of very general and generic questions. You pay $25 to the state of Kentucky. That is your tax. So there's been a lot of confusion over that. People will say, why am I going to go buy from the dispensary and I just have to pay tax on my marijuana? There is no tax on medical marijuana. No state has ever taxed medical marijuana. Please stop saying those lies in the community. Only recreational marijuana is taxed. Medical is never taxed. It's considered immoral and unethical. So your $25 a year to the state of Kentucky is your tax. You pay that fee. State of Kentucky has 30 business days to process your application. During that 30-day period, they'll come back and say yes or no. The only way they would say no is if they felt that your identity was fraudulent or if you have a disqualifying criminal history. Now, I did not bring that with me. However, that can be found online. But I can tell you right now that it's pretty serious stuff.
Yeah.
So you have to have some pretty serious felonies. So. Okay. So like once then we have everything submitted to the state, we pay our $25 fee. They have their 30 days to process our application. They'll come back with an email and they'll tell us that we're approved or denied. Like I said, there's only a few instances that a person would be denied. They can't appeal that too, in case there was, some kind of oversight. Once they're approved, they print their card. It's super simple. The state doesn't mail you anything. You print it yourself. You
of course.
On white copy paper. Yeah. I actually tell people to go to Office Depot and have it printed in a nice way. But whatever. You can print your card and then you go to the dispensary and then you're ready to purchase.
You're ready at that point.
You're ready to purchase. And yes, and it's very clear. I was really happy with when I went through the process myself because of thinking of my people, that they made it so simple. When, it's intimidating sometimes. And I've had to help some of my clients do that, that are older. Like I've had to have them give me their passwords and go on and help them finish their applications. And that's fine. I'm totally happy to do that for people. But they made it really simple. The online portal is not complicated at all. It's straightforward. Kentucky makes it clear over and over again what the rules are, because we do want to know what our rules are as a patient, and people get confused by that. I had a client the other day. She just got approval for her card and she's wanting me to meet her at the dispensary. And she asked me, she said, so should I not drive until I know how it affects me? And I'm like, you should never drive under the influence. Let's make that clear. Let's go ahead and clear that up right now. Yeah. So, I do have to kind of coach people through that. Just because you are a certified medical card holder and you went purchase your stuff legally, it doesn't mean you're just walking around smoking weed and driving and carrying on. No.
You still have responsibilities.
Still responsibilities. We still want to be responsible users, and we do not drive while we're under the influence. We do not use while we are in public. We do not use while we are in the vehicle. That's something that we're going to do at home. We're going to do it in private. But Kentucky is pretty clear on at least the transport guidelines as far as how do we transport it? How do I get it from the dispensary to my house? This weekend I'm going out of town. I'm going to take some with me. What does that look like? Yeah. So the state of Kentucky is very clear on that. And as long as you're abiding within that, then you're good to go. You have no problems.
So I think one of the hot topics that I know has been on my mind, and I just don't know enough about it, but the one thing that stood out to me in the law was about the carrying concealed weapon piece of the law. There was, in my mind, something that you can't have the CCDW permit and a medical card, something like that. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So that has been a question that I was telling you that is about every 7 to 8 out of 10 people that I have called me. That's their first question in Kentucky, is that if I do this, does that mean I have to give up my guns? And that is a very complicated question. And there's a couple things that I like to bring to people's attention when it comes to that. So first of all, the data that I want to make you aware of is as of 2026, 24 states in the United States have recreational marijuana, which means if you're 21 years of age, you can go buy it and do whatever you want with it. You don't have to have a doctor's certification. So 24 states in the United States have recreational marijuana laws. 40 states have medical cannabis plus DC as of January of 2026. So when we look at that, we realize that the majority of the United States has some form of legalization of marijuana, mostly medical. We look at places like California. Their medical program has been in place since 1996. Alaska is like the wild, wild west. They really never did prohibit marijuana. They made some changes in 1975, again in 2015, but by 2015 they went recreational, and they literally have it like liquor stores. It's really easy to get marijuana in Alaska, but so when we look at that, let's take into consideration that 40 states have already instituted medical marijuana programs. The first question I like to ask people is, did you see on the news where all these people lost their guns and got their guns rounded up because of marijuana? And they're like, no, I didn't see that. And I'm like, oh, that's because it doesn't exist. It hasn't happened. So if this had been a problem, like we're like last to the ball game. So if this had been a problem across the rest of the United States, then we would have already heard of this. We would have already seen that this was something that was happening in other states, but we have not seen that. However, in Kentucky, we have like a really strong affection towards our Second Amendment rights, towards our gun ownership. It's something that we feel very proud of. We feel very strongly about. We vote towards that. So in Kentucky, I feel like it's really important. And so that's why a lot of people ask about it. We also have very lenient gun laws here in comparison to the other states. So when our program, before it even took effect, like before we even had dispensaries available, we already had like the police chief or a sheriff in Louisville or what, some random county that the news was going and interviewing, like, tell us, is it illegal? And we had kind of like some isolated law enforcement who was speaking on behalf of everyone and telling us, oh, you must choose. And if you Google that, you will find that. You will find that the news went out and interviewed specific law enforcement agents who said, yes, Kentuckians must choose one or the other. That was their opinion. And, when we look at like law and case law, we know that, they all have opinions, especially the lawyers, right?
Right.
So, when you start talking about law, it depends on who you're talking about. It depends on who you're talking to, right? Like, is this illegal? Well, it's illegal until we take it to court and get it changed, right? Until we sway the court in a different direction. So we had people kind of speaking in a place of authority in Kentucky before our program was really off the ground and making it like loud and clear to Kentuckians that they must choose one or the other. However, that's not exactly the case. So first of all, when you go through the process in Kentucky to get your medical marijuana card, at no point are you asked that question. So I've gone through that process twice now with myself and my initial card and renewing my card, and never at any point did the state of Kentucky ask me if I own guns, had me, declare that I was going to waive that right, asked me about my carry and conceal license, make it me aware that I was choosing one or the other. So that's a non-issue as far as when you are submitting your application and going through the process. There has been also some Kentucky legislators who have spoke out about that. But when we look across the United States, what has happened is there has been very few isolated cases where this has been challenged. So I printed some off for us today. I'm going to come back to the main one, but we have New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin in 2022, United States versus Rahimi in 2024. United States versus Conley in 2024, federal judge in Rhode Island, 2025. We have all these cases that have come before the court in which they were trying to disarm legal marijuana users. And in every case, the lower court ruled in favor of the marijuana user. Because what the court has determined is that the Constitution does not allow for the stripping of our gun rights simply because you are a cannabis user. And they've done that on a couple of different bases. One of the bases that they keep doing is that it's kind of hinging on historical tradition. So they're looking at historical tradition and kind of looking for a precedent for disarming sober individuals based solely on past substance usage. So one of the biggest things they've looked at is alcohol use. So can we take away a person's right to bear arms because they are an alcoholic? No, we cannot. Now, if that person's alcoholism results in multiple crimes that then end up as a felony, then we know that felons lose their right to bear arms.
Right.
But if maybe their alcohol charges are minor charges, then the alcoholic will keep their gun rights. Correct?
Right.
Because they purchased the alcohol legally. It was an illegal thing. Now, maybe they might have been acting illegally outside of that usage, right? But it was a legal purchase. It was not purchased illegally. So what they're trying to do is kind of look at the historical precedent of that. And the argument is that if a person is in a state that has a medical marijuana program, like we do right now, then I'm purchasing my medical marijuana as a patient. It is my medicine. I have purchased it legally. So that does not give the right to the government to then strip me of my constitutional rights based upon that. Now, if you look at a state like, let's just choose our neighboring state, which is the state of Ohio. Ohio has medical and recreational. Well, if I lived in Ohio, if I'm 21 years of age of older, I can go and I can purchase recreational marijuana. Well, I just bought it legally. So can my rights be stripped then? So what the lower court has decided is that no, there is no constitutional basis for that. And there is also no historical precedence for that. So right now we have a case that's been sitting for some time period, which is the United States versus Hemini, and I hope I'm saying that right, about a Texas man. This has been going on for a while, and it's sort of just been sitting there. And it's coming from a 2022 decision, and we're waiting on the Supreme Court at the federal level to make a decision. And what the internet tells us is that it is expected that the Supreme Court will hear this case by the end of June of 2026. And they've been putting it off for a while. And once this case is heard, then we will have better clarification on what that's going to look like on the federal level, because gun laws, states have, as you know, as law enforcement, states have gun laws, but then the federal government sort of overrides that. There's federal gun laws. Right. And that's really where the problem comes in, is the ATF. It's more at the federal level. So once the Supreme Court makes a decision on this, it should give us some clarity as to far as, are we going to allow for legal, now we're talking about legal, not illegal,
right,
but legal marijuana users to still be able to possess firearms. And all we can base it on is what the lower court has already ruled. And so far, the lower court every single time has thrown the cases out and ruled in favor of the patient, because there just really is no basis to take this away.
Yeah. So the trend is in favor of the medical user. Okay.
Yep.
And second to that, you've related it to maybe the comparison to say I can go buy a 12-pack of Bud Light and drink at the house, and nobody's coming to get my guns for that. And so it feels like the courts then are starting to make that comparison to say it's no different than if you buy a box of Frosted Flakes or Bud Light or cannabis.
Right. If it's purchased illegally, then it's not a basis to strip you of your fundamental rights. And, the one thing I'd like to say too is that, and I feel like you would agree with this too, as being previous law enforcement, is that the courts take the right to bear arms very seriously. And especially at the federal level, and especially in Kentucky, like we take that very seriously. That's not something that legislators would be so quick to just throw off the table, because they understand the ramifications of that. The right to bear arms is very fundamental to us as Americans. And so it is a really important issue. And my personal feeling is that the Supreme Court would never take that away, because it's difficult to say, okay, you guys can go buy your marijuana in your legal states with this multi-billion-dollar business that literally the tax revenue keeps your school systems going, but you have to give up your guns. You have to give up like your second right.
Right.
I don't see that happening.
I can't see that any court would open up the concept of altering the Constitution of the United States for this issue.
Right.
When, like you said, 40 states already have a path, and
40 states.
24, 20, whatever it was, have recreational.
Recreational, yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine they're going to take an opposite stand of that.
It is. It's it's just so convoluted, and it would cause so much issue at the state level, and states would be very upset about that, because they're receiving so much revenue off of these programs. And
True.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that they just want to walk away from. And the thing is that like, we will not have a firm, when people get really upset about this, because they want me to give them like a firm answer. And what I tell them is like, the most important thing to remember is that guns and marijuana do not mix, just like alcohol and marijuana does not mix. So, I can have my carry and conceal license. I can be a responsible gun owner. But if I'm going to go out to a bar with my husband tonight and listen to a band and have some drinks, and he's going to drive me home, and like, we're going to get a Lyft or whatever, like we're going to be responsible. I'm not going to take my gun, because I'm not allowed to. You're not allowed to take a gun into a bar. That's illegal. I'm not allowed to have a gun on my person while I'm consuming alcohol. Alcohol is legal, but it is illegal for me to have it on my person while I am intoxicated. It is the same concept with cannabis. And, it's funny how many times I have to explain that to people. Like, we don't drive while we're under the influence of cannabis, just like alcohol. And I tell people, just look at it just like alcohol.
Yeah.
We don't need our guns while we're consuming our cannabis. Now, if we are inside of our home, we're inside of our home. If we have our gun in our closet or in our lockbox, it's not on our person, but if I'm going to go out, if I'm going to consume cannabis and then I'm going to have someone drive me somewhere, I don't need my gun on me, right? They don't mix. We don't want to put them together, because when we put them together is then when we put ourselves in a situation where we could have an issue with law enforcement.
Sure.
Now, people say, well, but if I do have an issue with law enforcement, what happens then? And I'm like, well, what happens then is that technically under the law, you are in violation. Now, you'd be charged, you'd be arrested, potentially, maybe not, but then you would have to go through the court system. Now, what will probably happen is that in Kentucky courts, they're going to side with you, but that will not take away from the fact that may be 2 or 3 years of your life.
Yeah, that's right.
And lawyer fees that you have to deal with. So that's something that you have to take into consideration. But I do feel like that Kentucky judges and Kentucky legislators will expand their understanding of this as our program grows. Yeah. And I do expect them to protect that for us, because I don't think that it's something, especially when you start looking at these smaller counties, I really do not expect that this is something that judges would want to strip their citizens of their rights, especially if they have someone standing in front of them that they go to church with that has cancer.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels like this is so new that this is just part of that growing pains, learning curve. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we wouldn't have this conversation because it'll be figured out by then. But right now, it's still on people's minds. Like you said, maybe 70% of your phone calls,
at least.
First question. First question.
Listen, I go hunting. Does that mean I can't get my card? And I'm like, well, if you're going to go hunting and you're going to have your gun on you, then you're definitely not going to be using your medical marijuana that day.
Yeah.
But, you got to think about it like, so if I was going to go hunting, I don't hunt, but let's pretend I did. If I was going to go hunt for deer, turkey, whatever, and I have a bad back, and my doctor has given me Loratab to manage that, am I going to take a Loratab the day that I go hunting with my friends?
Right.
No, I'm not.
Responsible usage.
That's right.
You're not doing shots of Jaeger out in the woods, hopefully.
That's right. It's all about being responsible.
Yeah.
Definitely.
What's next for cannabis for us?
Okay, so I hope that the next thing that we see, and this is the only part of the program that we have right now, the medical program, that I can criticize. And like I said, there's lots of criticism online. If you go online, you'll see people just complaining every second about it. But my experience through the whole program is that our program is actually not that bad. And it's actually pretty good. I feel like they've done a pretty good job with it. The only thing that we really need is home grow. And that is something that the advocacy groups tried really hard to keep intact. And, I've seen this through the years. Like I was talking earlier about taking my little baby and my kids with me, and we were going and advocating, and the bills that were put forth then, same kind of thing. We start out with this great bill, and they'd whittle it down. It'd go to committee. The committee would approve it, but then they would wait till the last minute where it couldn't be voted on. Then we wouldn't get it. It was like every year it was the same crap. We always wanted to keep the home grow in the program. And when they got our law changed here recently, home grow got cut out. And I kind of understand that in a sense that I know that they've been really hesitant to bring our program in, and home grow is it's intimidating, and it also requires more resources on behalf of law enforcement. And in Kentucky, our resources are already pretty tight.
Are you speaking to like I could grow my own?
If you were a medical patient. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So, in most states keep home grow in their program, and there's really important reasons for that. But what happens when you keep home grow in the program is that then it still has to be regulated. And so that's usually done by like the sheriff's department of your county or the law enforcement. They will come out and inspect it. They'll make sure that you have
Sure.
the right amount of plants or less than what you're allowed, that it's not like in plain view of your neighbors or children. Like, there's always certain stipulations on that. So, they will come out and inspect that. So I do understand that going into home grow initially in the program is a little bit intimidating because it does pull resources as far as law enforcement goes. Now, I would argue they could pull that away from the illegal extractions and divert that money elsewhere, but whatever. I'm not going to get off on a tangent on that. I was not really surprised that they whittled it down. It's like they have to compromise, right? Like they finally got the program passed. Hallelujah.
Yeah.
But they did have to get rid of that. I would like to see that come back in the next couple of years. And here's the thing that's important about home grow. So when you have and we're talking about medical. So in recreational, I've never heard of a single state that has allowed recreational users to home grow. It's always medical patients. So the idea behind the home grow is that the dispensary creates a financial barrier. And like I said, like we've already kind of seen that here, people complaining about the prices of the dispensary. I will personally argue it's maybe $10 more than what you're paying on the street, whatever. But there is still a financial barrier for some folks. And at the end of the day, I mean, it's just like tomatoes, like if you grow your tomatoes at home, they're a lot cheaper than if you go buy them from the store. So we get into a financial barrier that when we use this as medicine, we don't want the financial aspect to be a barrier to someone's access. So if someone can home grow, they can grow their own medicine and they don't have to go and pay the dispensary. Now, there's another caveat to that. And Kentucky is actually a really good example of that. When you look at the state, we have a lot of people in Eastern Kentucky, the mountains, Southeastern Kentucky. Now, we do have some dispensaries opening in those areas, but still we potentially could have a situation where you could have someone who lives maybe out in, Eastern Kentucky County. They're hours away from the closest dispensary. They already do not have a lot of money. Maybe they don't even have a car. They might have to borrow a car or get a ride. So not only are they going to have the expense of driving or getting someone to drive them to the dispensary, but then the money to pay for the product. So when we allow for home grow, that's what really gives the access to people who are in a different demographic, that we want them to still be able to access the same medicine, but not have to, have a car, have the money to go to the dispensary.
Yeah.
So the home grow is really important. The third part is that we also know, everybody says there's no research. Yes, there is. And we actually know that certain very specific strains are good for certain conditions. And if I have a really unique medical condition, and I've learned and researched and know, I need this strain. I need this certain strain. I need these certain terpenes. My local dispensary may not offer that now or ever, but I could grow that myself.
Certainly. You're right.
So, and especially when we look at like seizures, epilepsy and certain type of seizure disorders. So sometimes we want a very specific strain of cannabis that is not available to us. But if I could grow that at home myself, there fixes my problem. So I would like to see home grow come into the program. And
you're not just saying just like the cowboy method, Wild West, of just grow whatever.
It's never like that.
This is a regulated, for lack of a better word.
Always regulated.
Yeah.
Yes. So what that looks like is that, like maybe a program says that you can grow 6 plants if you're a medical card holder, and those have to be inspected at certain phases during the growth. And then a deputy from like your local sheriff's department, you call, you schedule that, they come out, they put eyes on the plant, they make sure they're in the right place, that they're not visible to your neighbors, to your children, to whatever stipulations the state has put forth. And they go, yep, you're good. They sign a piece of paper, and then that way you're just still growing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Gotcha.
So, I mean, and like I said, the advocacy groups would disagree with me because they were like, we should all be able to grow without that crap. And I agree, but it's just not reasonable. What's reasonable is what other states have done. The law, the government is never going to let us just be the Wild West and do what we want. But we do need to have some sort of pathway forward to where we can allow people to home grow, and we can allow that to be done under responsible regulation and have local, let's have those deputies, those state police, those sheriff, whatever. Let's have them come and do that instead of flying helicopters over looking for illegal plants, right? We can just divert that money and let people grow their own. Especially when you look at people with cancer, like that's something we really haven't talked about much tonight, but I think is worth mentioning is, like I said earlier, like, it's one thing when we talk about like someone like me, like, I want cannabis because I hurt. Like my body hurts.
Right.
I want to not hurt. I want to have a good quality of life and feel good, but I also want to be able to work and raise my children and function. There's people who just want to use marijuana to relax and let go and chill with your wife after work or your husband or whatever, just like kick back like you were having a beer. All those things are fine. But when you look at people who have cancer, it's a completely different demographic. And, when people have cancer and they start to explore cannabis, they realize that like, this could save my life. It's a completely different conversation than when we're talking about pain management or we're talking about recreational relaxation. It's a completely different demographic of people. There's a lot more passion. There's a lot more tears. There's a lot more urgency involved in that. And also there's a lot more product needed. If we're going to use cannabis to try to kill cancer tumors, we need a lot of weed, not a little. We need a lot. We do. We need a lot. And not because we're trying to get that person so high that they don't know what's going on. It's because we want to try to shrink the tumors. And so that person needs to consume a very large amount of cannabis. That is not feasible financially for most folks. So we have to consider that. And, a lot of times when these legislators finally, against all they want, agree to say yes to these, that's who they're thinking about. They're thinking about their neighbors with cannabis, or I'm sorry, with cancer. Yeah. They're thinking about the people they go to church with that have cancer. They're thinking about people who have told them that. And, let me think, it was like 2017, I think. At a really close friend of mine, his mom had breast cancer, and she's like Southern Baptist. She's like worked at the church her whole life, same church. And, she got breast cancer. And when she went to oncology at University of Kentucky, the oncologist was going through, like, we're going to do this. We're going to take your breast off. We're going to do, the treatments. They remove both of her breasts. It's just, traumatizing. And one of the first things he told her is he said, "Have you ever smoked marijuana?" And she was like, "No." She grew up a Southern Baptist. She's like, "No, I might start listening to jazz music."
Yeah. Next thing you know,
all she could think was reefer madness, right?
Yeah.
And he said, "I know that you have children. They've been in here with you." He said, "You're going to need to ask your children to get you some marijuana before you start your treatments." And when they told me that, it's almost making me tear up right now. It really broke my heart because, it's, and this is why I fought so hard for this. And I still will fight hard for those people because, the fact that oncology doctors at University of Kentucky tell their patients that, why they tell them that? Because they know.
Yeah.
They know that it's the only thing that works. So they're telling their patients to do something illegal. They don't have to do that anymore, but they were up until recently. And it's really unfair to a sweet woman who grew up in the Southern Baptist Church. She taught pottery classes there. She's gone now. She died from the cancer. It's really sad for a doctor at the University of Kentucky to tell her that she will have to have her children go and illegally purchase her marijuana to help her get through the next few months.
Yeah.
That's not fair.
When you don't even know what the strain or
nothing.
When you could almost customize your menu for what would be best for the patient.
And, they always, for years and years in the cannabis industry, they've said, if you don't believe there's no research for marijuana, just go talk to an oncologist. All oncologists will tell you.
Yeah.
You must have marijuana if you're going to go through cancer treatments. It is a must. And what they're talking about is symptom management. What they're talking about is you should consider smoking marijuana so that you don't throw up all the time and so that you're not nauseated constantly and so that maybe you can sleep and that maybe we can keep your appetite under control and your quality of life. That's what they're approaching it from. But in reality, if you go online and you start looking, you will find that there is just this amazing community of people who are literally still alive from using cannabis to shrink their tumors. So there's more than one application for cannabis for cancer. And so in my opinion, we, especially if we're going to legislate it, especially if the government's going to get involved and say, okay, you can have it as long as it's for medical reasons, then we really do, and not to downplay like patients like me or other people who have chronic pain and have, seizures and these other conditions, but we really do need to consider our cancer patients. And we really do need to consider, do we have programs that are set up that are feasible for these folks? Because for them, it's life or death. It's not just symptom management. It could literally mean the difference between life and death.
Yeah.
So,
we've been talking for some time this evening, and I originally had said let's keep it at about an hour.
Fun subject, though.
There's no chance of us keeping this at an hour. No, but we're approaching almost 3, and I don't even feel that we have even started on the topic yet. There's just so much here, which I think only highlights the need for a Jennifer. Is
thank you.
Right there's this has been wonderful, but I feel like I have just as many questions as before we sit down to say, really? Teach me the next part. So with that, how do people find you? I mean, what's your suggestion for that?
So they can go to my website because I gave up social media for my business during COVID.
Right.
So they can go to my website at cbdwellnessofky.com. I brought you some cards.
Wonderful.
Some little swag today. Yeah. And when they go on there, there's lots of information, frequently asked questions. There's information about me. There's information about my services. There's also, they can email me through the website, and there's also my phone number. I actually post my phone number on there.
Yeah.
So, and I do let people call me. And usually when people contact me, I try to go ahead and set up an appointment for them because just like me and you talking tonight, I would love to be able to help people in 15 minutes. But usually that doesn't happen. Usually when people call me, they have very specific needs and they have very specific questions. And I don't like for people to walk away from me like, oh, I'm still confused. So I like when people walk away to say, I feel confident. I understand. I feel good about this. I feel like I have the information I need. So, they're always welcome to email, call me. I like to set up a time and then just kind of see where they're at, what it is they're needing, from me, what they have in mind, and then just kind of go from there. And then we also have really amazing educational events planned for this year. And my thing for the educational events is I'm really super excited about it because you were talking about in the beginning part of the show, how do we break the stigma? Mm-hmm. We break the stigma through the educational events that I'm getting ready to start offering, where people can come and sit in a fancy restaurant and get served lunch amongst a bunch of other people that look just like them and talk just like them and have the same questions as them and realize that they're not alone and realize that this is okay. We don't have to stay behind closed doors anymore. This is no longer really taboo. And there is research and there is information and there is real things that we can use, you're not going to have to roll a joint. Okay. We're not smoking joints. We're going to talk about, in our educational events, we're going to teach people about how to cook with cannabis because that's what a lot of people 60 plus want to do. They would rather eat it. And that's totally fine. You can do that. But you need to know how to do that.
Right.
If you don't know how to do that the right way, you're just going to waste your product. So we want to kind of help people on that kind of journey of understanding what is it that I need based on what I want my outcome to be. And it just really help people understand the law and understand, how to how to use this medicine. So
Yeah.
all that information can be found on my website, and I'm really excited for our events. And I'll be giving away a lot of stuff at the events. We're going to have sponsors and swag and all kinds of great stuff at the events.
The whole 9 yards.
Yeah, oh yeah. The events are going to be really nice.
So easiest way, and we'll put the link to your website in our show notes.
Yes, perfect.
Go to the website, get on board,
It's all there.
and you'll find anything.
And if you're confused, then just give me a call or shoot me an email.
Yeah. What else haven't we talked about we need to get on here?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's been a lot.
We've covered it all.
The irony, we're going to go out, the show song is jazz music. So
Perfect.
when you said that, I thought, man, that's perfect that that's what we have going on. Yeah. So this horrible cannabis got us listening to jazz music here together.
Right.
Well, listen, as we said earlier, this has been maybe 2 years in the making to get you and I to sit down and have this conversation. I think that was meant to be because a lot has changed since we first had this conversation. And I think that's just the powers that be saying now's the time to have the talk, because there are pathways for patients to get to the cannabis.
Yes.
For that, I say thank you for coming. Thanks for spending some time with me. I appreciate your knowledge and all the things that you have, and I hope the listeners do too. So at any rate, we will put all the links in the show notes. To everyone listening, thank you so much for all the likes, shares, downloads, and listens. And with that, we'll see you on the next show.